Story 1. During dinner, my grandfather asked, "Did you like the car I gave you as a present last year?" I replied that I hadn't received any car. Then my parents froze and the truth came to light. My name is Jake. I'm 23 years old, and for as long as I can remember, I've always been the son that nobody wanted around. It's not one of those dramatic stories of abandonment or domestic violence. It's worse. It's the story of a family that simply decided I didn't matter enough. My parents, Sarah and Robert, were always very clear about who the favorite was. My sister, Madison, 2 years younger, was the princess of the house. She was the one who received the best toys at Christmas. She was the one who got brand-name clothes. She was the one who heard words of encouragement when she got mediocre grades at school. I, on the other hand, could come home with a first-place certificate in Math Olympics and receive only a "that's nice, but don't get cocky about it." I grew up accustomed to comparisons. "Look how affectionate Madison is," my mother would say when I tried to show affection. "See how spontaneous and fun she is," my father would add when I tried to tell some joke or interesting story. It was as if I were a poorly made draft of the person they really wanted as a son. When I finished high school with a 9.2 average and was accepted into 3 different universities, my parents barely looked up from the television. "University is very expensive, Jake," said my mother without even looking at me. "Besides, Madison will need support when her turn comes. She has a bright future ahead." At 18, while my sister got a new laptop to prepare for college entrance exams, I started working at an electronics store in the city mall. It wasn't my dream job, but it paid enough for me to support myself. I organized products, served customers, and sometimes even managed to make some good sales that earned me extra commission. The work was tiring, especially on weekends when the mall got crowded. I'd come home with aching feet and dry hands from handling so many products, but there was a certain dignity in it. I was building something on my own without depending on anyone. Meanwhile, Madison continued living like a princess. At 20, she had never worked a single day. She spent afternoons at the gym, went out with friends for lunch at expensive restaurants, and always had money to buy whatever she wanted. My parents justified it by saying she was preparing for the job market and that she was still too young to worry about these things. What intrigued me was where all that money came from. My father worked as an accountant at a small company and my mother gave private English lessons a few times a week. It didn't seem enough to afford the lifestyle they led, especially considering all of Madison's expenses. The answer came when I was 19. My paternal grandfather, William, called to talk to me. He had always been different from my parents. When I was a child, he would take me fishing at the river that ran near his house, teach me to fix bicycles in his garage, and always listen to me attentively when I talked about my dreams and plans. "Jake, my boy," he said in that call, "I'm moving to Portugal. I got a good job opportunity there, and I think it'll be good for me to start over." I was sad, but I understood. He had been widowed 2 years ago and maybe really needed a change of scenery. "But don't worry," he continued. "I'll always take care of the family from there. Every month I'll send money to help you all. I want you to be able to study, to have the opportunities you deserve." After he moved, things at home visibly improved. My parents stopped complaining so much about bills. Madison started showing up in even more expensive clothes, and they even renovated the kitchen. When I asked about Grandpa William's money, my mother said he sent an amount every month to help with general household expenses. I didn't question much. After all, I had my job and could manage on my own. But sometimes I wondered if part of that money shouldn't be directed toward me, since Grandpa had specifically mentioned my studies. Contact with my grandfather became sporadic. He would call from time to time, always asking how I was, if I was managing to study, if I needed anything. I always said everything was fine, that I was working and managing on my own. He seemed proud but also worried. "You've always been a special boy, Jake," he would tell me. "You have a good heart and a determination that few have. Don't let anyone make you feel like you're worth nothing." Those words sustained me on difficult days when I'd come home tired from work and hear my family making comments about my mediocre job or about how I had no ambition. At least one person in the world believed in me. On my 23rd birthday, to my surprise, I found a small cake on the kitchen table when I got home from work. It wasn't much, one of those supermarket ones with artificial frosting. But it was there. My parents and Madison sang "Happy Birthday" with the same enthusiasm of someone fulfilling a boring obligation. "It's from Grandpa William," my mother explained. "He asked us to organize something for you." I was touched. Even from far away, my grandfather remembered me. It was more than my own family usually did. We ate the cake in silence, each one lost in their own thoughts, and then everyone went back to their normal activities. But in the following weeks, I noticed strange changes. My parents started showing off even more. My mother appeared with a leather purse that cost more than my monthly salary. My father bought a watch that I had seen in a mall window for an absurd price. And Madison was unbearable with her designer clothes and sneakers that cost a fortune. One day, I heard my mother on the phone talking about a trip they were planning. "It'll be just the three of us," she was saying. "A little getaway to relax at the beach. Everything's already booked." When I found out about the trip, I wasn't invited. "There's no room for 4 people in the room," my father explained. "And you have to work anyway, right?" They spent an entire week at a 5-star resort, posting photos on Instagram of expensive meals, colorful drinks, and moments of happy family. I stayed home working my normal shifts, wondering where all the extra money was coming from. Could it be that Grandpa William was sending more money? Maybe he had gotten a better job in Portugal or received some inheritance. I tried not to think much about it, but curiosity was eating at me. The year passed slowly. My routine continued the same. Work, home, work, home. Sometimes I'd go out with some colleagues for a beer, but in general, my social life was limited. I didn't have money for the expensive activities my family did, and I kind of got used to the loneliness. Madison continued without working, living her princess life. My parents continued treating me like I was a burden on the family, and I continued trying to prove I was worth something, even though nobody seemed to notice. When my 24th birthday was approaching, I wasn't expecting anything special. Maybe another cheap cake, maybe not even that. But then, 3 days before the date, my phone rang. "Jake, my boy, how are you?" It was Grandpa William's warm voice, which I hadn't heard in months. "Grandpa, what a surprise." "I'm well, working hard." "Great, great. Listen, I have news for you. I'm returning to Brazil next week. I want to be there for your birthday." My heart raced. I hadn't seen my grandfather in 3 years, and now he was coming back especially for me. "We'll have dinner at the best restaurant in town," he continued. "Invite your parents and Madison. It'll be a family celebration." I hung up the phone with a smile that hadn't appeared on my face in a long time. Finally, someone who really cared about me would be here. I could barely wait to see Grandpa William again. When I told my family about the visit, the reaction was strange. My parents exchanged nervous glances, and Madison was quieter than usual. "That's good," said my mother, but her voice sounded forced. It'll be good to see Grandpa William again." I didn't understand why they seemed so uncomfortable. After all, it was Grandpa William who was funding their lifestyle. Shouldn't they be anxious to see him? But I didn't think much about it. I was too busy imagining what it would be like to reunite with the only person who had always believed in me. The day finally arrived. My grandfather William showed up at the front door in the middle of the afternoon with that wide smile I remembered from my childhood. He was thinner, his hair grayer, but he had the same contagious energy as always. "My boy," he said, wrapping me in a tight hug. "How you've grown. You're a grown man." I felt an emotion I hadn't experienced in years. Here was someone who was genuinely happy to see me, who hugged me like I was the most important person in the world. My parents greeted Grandpa William with forced smiles, and Madison barely looked up from her phone. "Come on, family," said my grandfather, clapping his hands. "Today is a day of celebration." I reserved a table at Terrico Duval. My eyes widened. Terrico Duval was the fanciest restaurant in town, the kind of place where dishes cost more than I earned in a day of work. During the trip to the restaurant, my grandfather wouldn't stop asking me questions. He wanted to know how work was going, if I was happy, what plans I had for the future. It was the first time in years that someone showed genuine interest in my life. "I'm very proud of you, Jake," he said, putting his hand on my shoulder. "Working hard since you were 18, supporting yourself. That shows character." From the back seat, I heard Madison mutter, "Working at the mall isn't exactly impressive." My father chuckled, and my mother sighed as if she were annoyed. The restaurant was even more elegant than I had imagined. Waiters in impeccable uniforms, tables with linen tablecloths, crystal glasses that sparkled under the candlelight. I felt out of place in my simple shirt and jeans, but my grandfather reassured me. "You look perfect, my boy. True elegance comes from within." The dinner was a surreal experience. The food was incredible, each dish a work of art. My grandfather ordered expensive wine and made sure to include me in all the toasts. For the first time in my life, I felt truly celebrated. But my family was acting strange. My parents spoke little and always seemed nervous when my grandfather asked me any questions. Madison was on her phone the whole time, clearly bored. When they tried to talk, they always ended up making derogatory comments about me. "Another year at the mall, right, Jake?" said Madison with that tone of superiority I knew well. "When are you going to get a real job?" My mother laughed. "Yeah, at your age you should have more ambition." I felt my face heat up with anger and shame, but my grandfather immediately came to my defense. "Ambition? This boy has been working since he was 18. While others his age are spending their parents' money, he's building his independence. That's much more than ambition. It's dignity." The awkwardness at the table was palpable. My parents lowered their eyes and Madison finally put away her phone. Dessert arrived, a delicious tiramisu that cost more than my lunch for a week. It was then that my grandfather looked at me with that loving smile and asked the question that changed everything. "By the way, Jake, tell me, how was the gift I sent you last year?" I was confused for a moment. "The gift?" "Yes, the birthday gift. Did you like it?" I thought about the cheap cake my parents had bought. "Oh yes, thank you for the cake, Grandpa. It was very thoughtful of you." My grandfather's smile disappeared. He frowned as if something wasn't adding up. "Cake? What cake?" "The cake you asked them to buy for my birthday," I explained, starting to feel a chill in my stomach. "Jake, I didn't ask them to buy any cake," he said, looking directly at my parents. "What's this story?" My mother tried to intervene. "Dad, maybe there was a misunderstanding." "No," said my grandfather, raising his hand. "No misunderstanding. Jake, didn't you receive the car I sent you?" The world stopped. "Car? What car?" "The red Civic I bought and had delivered to your house on your birthday. A brand new car with all the documents in your name." I felt like the ground had disappeared under my feet. I didn't receive any car, Grandpa. Just the cake." The silence at the table was deafening. My parents were pale and Madison had stopped breathing. My grandfather looked at each of them and I saw his expression change from confusion to a cold fury I had never seen in him. "Where," he said, pronouncing each word with dangerous calm, "is the car I bought for my grandson?" My parents started stammering, trying to make up excuses. My mother said something about delivery problems. My father blamed the transport company. But my grandfather wasn't stupid. He had built a company from scratch. He knew when they were lying to him. "I want the truth," he said, hitting his hand on the table so hard that the glasses trembled. "Now!" The entire restaurant was looking at us. Other customers whispered among themselves, discreetly pointing at our table, but I didn't care. I was in total shock. A car? My grandfather had given me a car. It was my mother who finally gave in. With a trembling voice, she confessed, We sold the car." "Sold?" I shouted, unable to control myself. "You sold my car." "We needed the money," said my father, trying to justify himself. Things were difficult, and Madison was needing. Madison was needing what? I exploded. More designer clothes? More expensive sneakers? More resorts? My grandfather was absolutely livid. "You took the gift I bought specifically for Jake and sold it to pay for Madison's luxuries?" It wasn't just for Madison. My mother tried to defend herself. It was for the whole family. We took that trip, bought things we needed. Lies, I shouted. I didn't go on the trip. I never saw a cent of that money. You spent it all on yourselves. My grandfather stood up from his chair. 32,000 reis, he said, his voice cutting. That's what the car was worth. 32,000 reis that I saved working in Portugal to give a decent gift to my grandson. And you sold it to buy frivolities. The amount shocked me even more. 32,000 reis was more than I earned in 2 years working at the mall. And they had sold it like it was nothing. Dad, please let me explain, my mother tried. But my grandfather didn't want to hear it. There's no explanation, he said. You betrayed my trust. You stole from my grandson. And I'm sure this isn't the first time. He looked at me with an expression of deep sadness. Jake, my boy, I need to tell you something. That car wasn't the only gift I sent you. My heart stopped. What do you mean? For the last 3 years, every month I sent specific money for you. For your studies, for your needs, so you could have opportunities. I transferred it to your parents because I trusted they would pass it on to you. But now I understand you never saw any of it. I looked at my parents with a mixture of horror and rage. How many years? I asked, my voice trembling. 3 years, my grandfather replied. 600 reis a month, plus household expenses. Money that was rightfully yours. I did the math quickly. 600 reis a month for 3 years was more than 20,000 reis. Added to the 32,000 from the car, they had stolen more than 50,000 reis from me. You're thieves, I said with a coldness that surprised me. Thieves from your own family. Madison finally found her voice. Jake, don't be dramatic. That money helped the whole family. It helped you. It helped you, I corrected. It helped pay for your clothes, your sneakers, your outings. I never saw a cent. I worked like a slave while you lived like royalty with money that was mine. My grandfather put his hand on my shoulder. Jake, you're not staying one more day in that house. Come with me to Portugal. There you'll have the opportunities you deserve. I didn't think twice. When? Now. Today. Let's get your things and go to the airport. My parents panicked. Dad, you can't be serious, said my mother. He's our son. Son. My grandfather laughed bitterly. You treated this boy like a stranger his whole life. You humiliated him, robbed him, despised him, and now you want to talk about being a son. He turned to me. The decision is yours, Jake. You can stay here and continue being treated like garbage, or you can come with me and have the life you always deserved. I looked at my family. My parents were desperate, but not out of love. They were afraid of losing the money my grandfather sent. Madison seemed in shock, finally understanding that her princess life might be coming to an end. I'm going, I said, standing up from the table. I have nothing left here. My grandfather smiled for the first time since the truth had been revealed. Then let's go, my boy. Your new life starts now. When we left the restaurant, leaving my family at the table with the bill to pay, I felt a relief I hadn't experienced in years. Finally, someone had seen the truth. Finally, I had a chance to be valued. Grandpa, I said as we walked to the car. Thank you for believing in me. I always believed, he replied. And now you're going to see what it's like to have a real family. The trip to Portugal was like a dream. My grandfather had bought first-class tickets, and for the first time in my life I felt truly cared for. During the flight, he told me about the new life that awaited me. I have a consulting company in Lisbon, he explained. I started small, but it's grown a lot in recent years. You're going to work with me, learn the business. You have a talent for this. You always did. When we arrived in Lisbon, I was impressed by his house. It was a mansion in an upscale neighborhood with impeccable gardens and a stunning view of the city. But what caught my attention most was the garage. Choose one, he said, pointing to a row of sports cars. The one that was yours is no longer there, but any of these can be yours. There was a metallic blue BMW, a gleaming black Audi, and in the corner, a red Porsche that left me breathless. That one, I said, pointing to the Porsche. Good choice, my grandfather laughed. You have good taste. In the first days, I still couldn't believe the change. I had a room bigger than my parents' living room, a closet full of clothes my grandfather had ordered, and most importantly, I had respect. My grandfather consulted me about company decisions, valued my opinions, and treated me as an equal. The work at the consulting firm was challenging but rewarding. I dealt with important clients, made complex analyses, and felt that I was finally using my potential. My salary was 10 times higher than what I earned at the mall, and for the first time in my life I had money to do whatever I wanted. But the most important thing was the sense of belonging. My grandfather introduced me to friends as his grandson, the future of the company. He was proud of me, and that made all the difference. During the first months, my phone rang constantly. They were calls from Brazil, from my parents and Madison. I ignored them all. I had nothing to talk about with them. They had robbed me, humiliated me, and treated me like trash for years. Now that they no longer had my grandfather's money, they wanted to talk. My grandfather told me he had cut off all financial support the day after our departure. They made their bed, he said. Now let them sleep in it. 6 months later, curiosity finally won. One night, after a particularly good day at work, I decided to answer one of the calls. It was my mother. Jake, thank God. Are you okay? We were worried. I almost laughed. Worried? What do you want? We want to talk, son. You're our family. We miss you here. Family? I repeated the word like it was poisonous. Where was that family when I needed it? Where was it when you sold my car to pay for Madison's princess life? Jake, please let me explain. We're going through difficulties. Without your grandfather's money, things got very difficult. They're going to evict us next week. Now I really laughed. And what does that have to do with me? You're our son. You have an obligation to help us. Obligation? What obligation do I have to you? You treated me like trash my whole life. Now you want me to be the good son who helps the family. I heard my mother start to cry. Please, Jake. We know we made mistakes, but we're your family. You can't leave us on the street. You left me on the street emotionally my whole life, I replied. Now experience what it's like literally. My father took the phone. Jake, stop this ingratitude. After everything we did for you, everything you did for me, I exploded. You stole more than 50,000 reais from me. You sold my car. You humiliated me. You treated me like I was a burden. And now you come talking about ingratitude? We raised you, gave you a house, food. You gave me the minimum required while giving the maximum to Madison. Don't come asking me for gratitude now. I heard a third voice. It was Madison. Jake, you're being dramatic. It wasn't that bad. It wasn't that bad? I almost screamed. You spent the money that was mine on designer clothes for you. You went traveling and left me out. You mocked me every day. But now you have a good life. You don't need to be resentful. I have a good life despite you, not because of you. And you know what else? I'm happy knowing you're in misery. Finally, you're paying for what you did. My mother came back to the phone, sobbing. Please, Jake, we're your family. You can't abandon us like this. You abandoned me first, I replied. The difference is that now I have a choice, and I choose to have nothing to do with you. But we're your parents. Real parents don't do what you did. Real parents don't steal from their children. Real parents don't humiliate their children to elevate others. There was a long silence. Then my mother said, what if we ask for forgiveness? Forgiveness doesn't bring back the years of humiliation. Forgiveness doesn't bring back the money you stole. Forgiveness doesn't erase the pain you caused. So, you're going to leave us on the street? I'm not the one leaving you on the street. It was your choices that led you to this. You could have used Grandpa's money responsibly. You could have included me in the family. You could have treated me with respect. But you chose to humiliate and steal. Now deal with the consequences. My father tried one last card. And Madison? She's not to blame for any of this. Not to blame. I laughed with contempt. She participated in every humiliation. She laughed at me, called me a failure, and took advantage of every cent of the money that was mine. She's as guilty as you are. But she's your sister. A sister is someone who stands by your side, who supports you. Madison was never my sister. She was just a stranger who shared the same house. I heard Madison scream in the background. I always hated you anyway. You were always a burden on this family. Perfect, I said calmly. Finally, the truth. Thank you for confirming everything I always knew. My mother came back to the phone, desperate. Jake, please, at least give us a chance to redeem ourselves. You had 23 years of chances. You wasted them all. But now it's different. We understand our mistakes. You only understood when the money ran out. If Grandpa was still sending money, you wouldn't have even called me. There was another silence. I had hit the nail on the head. You know what makes me most angry? I continued. It's not even the money. It's the fact that you never really loved me. I was just an inconvenience you tolerated. And now when you need something, you want to pretend I'm a son. We do love you, said my mother. No, you love the idea of what I can do for you now. It's different. I hung up the phone and put it on silent. I didn't want to hear their pathetic pleas anymore. My grandfather, who had heard part of the conversation, put his hand on my shoulder. How do you feel? Free, I replied. And it was true. For the first time in my life, I felt truly free. In the following weeks, my grandfather told me what was happening in Brazil. The family had been evicted and was living in a tiny apartment in a dangerous neighborhood. My father had gotten a job at a factory earning minimum wage. My mother was cleaning houses to supplement the income. And Madison, who had never worked a day in her life, had to accept a job at a coffee shop. They're paying for years of arrogance, said my grandfather. They always thought they were better than everyone else, that they deserved a life of luxury without working for it. I felt deep satisfaction knowing they were finally facing reality. It wasn't revenge. It was justice. My new life in Portugal prospered more each day. My grandfather taught me everything about the business, and I discovered I had a natural talent for it. Within a year, I was already managing important accounts and contributing significantly to the company's success. I met incredible people, made true friends, and even started dating a colleague from the company, Sophia, who treated me with the respect and affection I had never experienced before. You're a special person, Jake, she would tell me. You have an inner strength that's admirable. Sometimes I would tell her about my childhood, about how my family treated me. She would be horrified. How can parents treat a child like that? It's incomprehensible. Because they never saw me as a real son, I would explain. I was just an accident they tolerated. 2 years after my departure, my phone rang again. It was a number I didn't recognize, but when I answered, I heard my mother's voice. Jake, it's me. Please don't hang up. How did you get this number? I asked an investigator to find you. Jake, please. I need to tell you something important. Against my better judgment, I listened. Madison is sick. Cancer. She needs treatment, but we don't have money. She could die. I felt a knot in my chest, but not of pity. It was anger. And what does that have to do with me? She's your sister. Even with all the problems, she's family. No, she's not. She chose not to be when she spent years humiliating me. Jake, please. She's sorry. She wants to talk to you. I'm not interested. How can you be so cold? It's a matter of life and death. She had a whole lifetime to treat me like a brother. She chose not to do that. Now, in the hour of need, she wants me to forget everything. But she's family. Family is someone who's by your side in good times and bad. Family is someone who supports you, loves you, respects you. You were never my family. You were just people who shared the same house with me. I heard sobs from the other side of the line. Jake, I know we made mistakes. We all made mistakes. But please don't let your sister die. She's not my sister, I repeated. And even if she were, you taught me that family doesn't help family. After all, when I needed help, where were you? I hung up the phone and never answered calls from that country again. 3 years passed. My life in Portugal was perfect. I had married Sophia. We bought a beautiful house in the center of Lisbon, and I had become a partner in my grandfather's company. We were rich, respected, happy. On a quiet Sunday, my grandfather called me to talk. "Jake, I have something to tell you. I received a call from Brazil yesterday." My stomach contracted. "About what?" "Madison died last week. Cancer." I felt nothing. Neither sadness nor relief. Just a neutral emptiness. "How are they?" "Destroyed. Your father had a heart attack after the funeral and is in the hospital. Your mother is alone with no money for anything." I was silent for a long time. "Do you feel anything?" asked my grandfather. "No," I replied honestly. "Should I?" "There's no right or wrong here, Jake. They made choices. You made yours. They could have had a good life if they had treated me like family. They could have used the money you sent wisely. They could have created an environment of love at home, but they chose the path of humiliation and favoritism." My grandfather nodded. "And now they're paying the price." "I don't feel sorry," I said. "I feel that justice was finally done." That night, I told Sophia everything. She hugged me tight. "You did the right thing," she said. "Family isn't who shares DNA with you. Family is who loves you, respects you, stands by your side. Your grandfather is your family. I am your family." She was right. I looked around. My beautiful house, my wonderful wife, my grandfather who loved me unconditionally, my prosperous company. And I realized I had found my true family. People who valued me, who believed in me, who treated me with respect and affection. That's what family really meant. My mother tried to contact me a few more times over the years, always with some new tragedy, always asking for help. I never responded. I had closed that chapter of my life forever. Today, at 28, I am a fulfilled man. I have a prosperous company, a family that loves me, true friends. I learned that sometimes to find happiness, you need to have the courage to leave behind toxic people, even if they share your blood. My grandfather, William, saved me, not just financially, but emotionally. He showed me what it's like to be truly loved, what it's like to have someone proud of you, what it's like to be part of a real family. And as for my biological family, well, they reaped exactly what they sowed. For years, they sowed contempt, humiliation, and selfishness. It was natural that they would reap loneliness, poverty, and regret. I feel no remorse. I feel gratitude for having had the strength to get out of that toxic situation and build a life based on true love and mutual respect. Sometimes the best thing you can do for yourself is have the courage to abandon those who don't deserve you, even if they're family. Because true family is choice, not obligation. And I chose well. Now on to the next story. Story 2. I discovered that my husband was going on a cruise with his lover. But when he arrived, I was already there with her fiancé. The message appeared on my screen at 3:17 p.m. on a Tuesday. An email confirmation forwarded from Paradise Cruise Lines, not sent to me, but accidentally shared to our family cloud account. A luxury suite, champagne package, couples massage, all booked under my husband's name for the following week during his important business conference in Seattle. Except there was another name on the reservation. Vanessa. My hands didn't tremble. My coffee didn't spill. Something crystallized inside me. 15 years of marriage suddenly framed with perfect and terrible clarity. I scrolled through the itinerary with strange detachment. A 5-day Caribbean cruise, ocean view balcony suite, captain's table dinner. All the romantic cliches you'd expect from a man who couldn't even remember what flowers I preferred on our anniversary. "Working late again tonight," he had texted me an hour earlier. "Don't wait up." I studied the cruise details, noting the suite cabin number. 1243, deck 10, starboard side. Something about seeing those specific details made it real. This wasn't just an affair. This was planning, calculation, a parallel life being built while I maintained ours. What a fool I had been. I remember standing up and walking to our bedroom closet, the one we shared. His suits hung next to my dresses as if they belonged there. His shoes lined up with mine. The physical proximity of our things suddenly seemed obscene. I was about to start pulling his clothes down to tear the fabric and destroy the memories when my phone chimed again. Another notification from the family cloud. A photo appeared. A woman, young, blonde, perfect teeth, posing in front of a mirror wearing lingerie that still had price tags hanging from it. The caption read, "Can't wait for you to take this off on our trip. Counting the days." I recognized her. Vanessa, the new customer service director at my husband's company. The one he had insisted on inviting to our Christmas party last December. The one who had looked at me with something like pity while accepting a glass of wine in my home. What stopped me from destroying his things wasn't restraint. It was a random memory. A conversation I'd overheard at a charity gala 3 months ago. Vanessa, discussing loudly her engagement to some tech entrepreneur, showing off a flashy diamond ring, talking about her upcoming June wedding. I sat on the edge of our bed, phone still in hand, and did something I'd never done before. I searched her name on social media. Her profile was public, filled with hashtags about being blessed and future wife. And there he was, her fiancé, tagged in dozens of photos. Bradley, handsome in his polished Silicon Valley way. His own profile was full of startup success stories and motivational quotes. One recent post caught my attention. Heading on a solo trip before the wedding madness. Time to clear my head and come back ready to start forever with Vanessa. The cruise dates matched exactly. A strange calm came over me, the kind that arrives when the universe delivers something so perfectly synchronized it feels like destiny. I opened my laptop and navigated to Paradise Cruise Line's deck plans. Cabin availability. My credit card was already in my hand. 20 minutes later, I had my own confirmation email. Single cabin 1245, right next to their love nest. The symmetry was too perfect to ignore. I took a deep breath and did the only rational thing a woman in my position could do. I found Bradley's business email through his company website and sent him a message. "Mr. Bradley, I believe we have something important to discuss regarding our respective partners and their upcoming Caribbean cruise. Would you be available for coffee tomorrow? It concerns your fiancée, Vanessa, and my husband, who have made plans I think you should know about." I attached the booking confirmation. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I simply waited, watching the little dots that indicated he was reading my message. Typing, stopping, typing again. His response came 3 minutes later. Where and when? The next morning, I sat at a corner table in an upscale downtown cafe, watching the door. I recognized him immediately, taller in person, with that confident stride of someone accustomed to commanding rooms. His eyes found mine across the space. Recognition, understanding, the look of someone whose world was also shattering. He sat across from me. No handshake, no introduction needed. "Show me everything," he said quietly. And I did. By the time our coffees had gone cold, we had formed an alliance born of shared betrayal. Not just an alliance, a pact, a strategy. "They think they're so clever," I said, finally allowing myself a bitter smile. "They have no idea what's coming." Bradley's expression hardened with resolve. "What exactly did you have in mind?" I leaned forward, lowering my voice. "I already booked the cabin next to theirs. But one person watching their romantic getaway crumble isn't as satisfying as two. Don't you think?" He matched my lean, his voice equally low. "Are you suggesting what I think you're suggesting?" "I'm suggesting we both take that cruise. I'm suggesting we become very, very good friends who just happen to be everywhere they are. I'm suggesting we make this the vacation they'll never forget, for all the wrong reasons." For the first time since we'd sat down, Bradley smiled. It wasn't a pleasant smile. It was the smile of someone imagining sweet, calculated retribution. "I'm in," he said. "But we need to be smarter than them. We need a plan that doesn't just catch them, but destroys whatever fantasy they've built." I nodded, feeling something like excitement beneath my anger. By the time we dock back in Miami, they'll wish they never set foot on that ship. The week before the cruise passed in an Academy Award-worthy performance. I kissed my husband goodbye as he packed his conference clothes. I helped him choose a tie for his presentation. I even drove him to the airport, waving from the departure lane with a smile plastered on my face. "I'll miss you," he said, his eyes not quite meeting mine. "Oh, I'm sure the time will fly," I replied, thinking of the swimsuits and evening dresses already packed in my own suitcase, hidden in Bradley's temporary apartment. As soon as his plane took off, not to Seattle but to Miami, I drove straight to the port where Bradley was waiting. We had spent every day of the past week planning, coordinating, and building a backstory that would make us seem like old college friends reuniting by chance, practicing our reactions for when we accidentally ran into our cheating partners. Memorizing the ship's layout, we booked identical shore excursions to the ones they had scheduled. "How are you feeling?" Bradley asked as we checked in at the cruise terminal, his hand briefly touching my shoulder. "I keep alternating between wanting to cry and wanting to push them both overboard," I admitted. He nodded. "I've already looked up maritime law. Unfortunately, that would be frowned upon." That unexpected flash of dark humor made me laugh for the first time in days. Felt strange in my throat. We boarded separately, agreeing to meet later after settling into our cabins. I found mine easily, 12:45, right next to where my husband would soon be caressing his lover. I pressed my ear to the adjoining wall. Empty for now. Their flight wouldn't arrive for a few hours. I unpacked methodically, hanging dresses I had bought specifically for this cruise. Dresses my husband had never seen. Dresses chosen to make a statement when the inevitable confrontation came. At 6 p.m., Bradley texted, "They've boarded. Just saw them at check-in." They didn't see me. My heart raced. My palms grew damp. The moment was approaching faster than I had anticipated. I met Bradley at a bar 3 decks up, far enough away that we wouldn't immediately run into them. He already had a martini waiting for me. "To the most twisted vacation either of us has ever taken," he said, raising his glass. I clinked mine against his. "May we survive with our dignity, if not our marriages." My marriage ended before it began, apparently. His voice had the same hollow quality I'd felt in my chest for days. We shared our stories then, filling in the blanks of our relationships. Bradley had met Vanessa at a tech conference 2 years ago. They had gotten engaged quickly, too quickly. He realized now there had been signs of her infidelity. Unexplained absences, secretive phone behavior, sudden work emergencies. "I ignored it all," he said, staring at his drink. "I wanted so badly to believe I'd found the right person." 15 years, I replied. 15 years I gave him. We talked about children. We decided together to focus on our careers first. We had a timeline. Next year was supposed to be our year to try. My voice broke unexpectedly. Bradley's expression softened. "I'm sorry. Don't be. Be angry." "I am." We spent hours talking, drinking enough to stay relaxed but not enough to cloud our judgment. We needed to be sharp. Ready. Around 10 p.m., we ventured to the main dining room for the welcome dinner. And there they were, sitting at a table for 2 near the windows. My husband's hand rested on the small of Vanessa's back as they studied the menu. Intimate, comfortable, practiced. The sight hit me harder than I expected. This wasn't their first trip together. This wasn't new. The realization made my knees buckle slightly. Bradley steadied me with a hand on my elbow. "Not yet," he whispered. "Let them think they got away with it. Tomorrow we begin." We retreated to a different restaurant, but I couldn't eat. My stomach was a knot of acid and anger. "How long do you think this has been going on?" I asked, pushing pasta around my plate. "Does it matter? A day? A month? A year? They both betrayed us." "It matters to me," I insisted. "I need to know how much of my life has been a lie." Back in my cabin that night, I pressed my ear to the wall again. I could hear them laughing, murmuring, the occasional creak of bed springs. I recorded it all, evidence for what was to come. I barely slept. When morning came, I met Bradley for breakfast on the Lido deck. We had determined that our cheating partners had booked a snorkeling excursion at our first port of call, a small private island owned by the cruise line. "Ready for day 1? Bradley asked, sliding a coffee toward me. "As ready as I'll ever be." We took the tender to the island 30 minutes after my husband and Vanessa had left. We spotted them easily on the beach, sharing a lounge chair, her head on his chest, his fingers running through her hair. Bradley and I set up our own chairs exactly in their line of sight, but angled so they wouldn't notice us immediately. We waited for the perfect moment. The recognition, the shock. It came when my husband stood up to get drinks from the beach bar. He turned, 2 frozen cocktails in hand, and froze mid-step when he saw me. The drinks tilted, blue liquid splashing over his hands. I gave a little wave, as casual as if we were running into each other at a grocery store. His face went pale so quickly I thought he might faint. He stood paralyzed, unable to move toward me or back to Vanessa, who was still scrolling through her phone obliviously. I adjusted my new swimsuit, a daring red piece I never would have chosen before, and walked directly toward him. "What a coincidence," I said, loud enough for nearby sunbathes to hear. "How lucky to run into you here. The weather looks different than I remembered from Seattle." He opened and closed his mouth, speechless. Over his shoulder, I saw Vanessa look up, confusion crossing her face, then horror as she spotted Bradley approaching behind me. "What? How?" My husband finally managed. "Your lover should be more careful about sharing your itinerary on the family cloud account," I said pleasantly. "Oh, and you should meet my friend Bradley. I think he already knows your girlfriend." I turned to Vanessa, whose face had turned the color of sour milk. "That engagement ring looks beautiful in the sunlight. Does your fiancé know you're engaged? Or is that just a detail you've overlooked while planning your romantic getaway?" People were watching us now, openly staring at the drama unfolding on the perfect white sand. "This isn't what it looks like," my husband finally said, the most cliché phrase possible. "Really?" I looked pointedly at the 2 blue drinks, then Vanessa's shocked face, then back at him. "Because it looks exactly like you're on a cruise with your lover while telling your wife you're at a business conference in Seattle." Bradley stepped forward, addressing Vanessa directly. "We've booked all the same shore excursions as you. Isn't that a wonderful coincidence? We'll have lots of quality time together on this trip." And that was just the beginning, the first day of 5. The foundation of what would become the most unbearable vacation for 2 people who thought they had gotten away with betrayal. I knew then that I had given this man everything. My youth, my trust, my unconditional support through career changes and family losses. I had been there through it all, believing we were building something meaningful together. And all the while, he had been building a separate life, a life that didn't include me. I gave them one last smile. "Enjoy your drinks. The cruise is just beginning." That night, Bradley and I regrouped in my cabin, analyzing the day's confrontation and fine-tuning our strategy for the days ahead. The initial shock had provided satisfaction, but it wasn't enough. Nowhere near enough for the depth of their betrayal. "They're rattled," Bradley observed, pacing the small confines of my room. I intercepted Vanessa trying to change their dinner reservations and shore excursions. I nodded, scrolling through the ship's app on my tablet. "They won't get far. I've befriended 3 crew members who keep me updated on any changes they try to make." This was no longer a spontaneous reaction. During that week of planning, I had been methodical in ways I never knew I could be. What my husband didn't know: I had photographed all his office documents before leaving home. I had downloaded his text message history through our phone plan's backup service. I had contacted our bank and flagged large expenses from the past year, creating a perfect timeline of his affair through hotel charges and gift purchases. What Vanessa didn't know: Bradley had been equally thorough, gathering screenshots of suspicious messages, tracking her location history, and, most damaging of all, documenting how she had been diverting funds from their startup's investors to finance luxury purchases. "Tomorrow is the formal dinner," I said, studying the schedule. "They'll expect us to make a scene." Bradley stopped pacing. "So we don't. We do the opposite." "Exactly." I smiled, feeling a cold clarity. "We'll be charming, friendly even. We'll invite them to join our table. We'll talk casually about psychological warfare." Bradley nodded appreciatively. The anticipation of confrontation is often worse than the confrontation itself. I stood and walked to my suitcase, pulling out a sealed envelope. I've been saving this for the right moment. Now I think I know when to use it. Inside were photos, security camera images from the ship showing my husband and Vanessa on previous cruises. Dates, timestamps, proof of a pattern going back 18 months. The head of security had been surprisingly helpful after I explained my situation and offered a generous consulting fee. How did you get these? Bradley asked, impressed. Let's just say when your husband brags about always booking the same cruise line for business trips, it creates a traceable pattern. I laid the photos chronologically. 8 cruises in 18 months. Always with her. Always during what he claimed were conferences or client meetings. Bradley whistled softly. That's not a romance. That's a second relationship. Exactly. And tomorrow night, I want them both to understand that we know everything. Not just this cruise. Everything. We stayed up past midnight planning every interaction, every casual encounter for the remaining days. We were no longer improvising. This was choreographed retribution. The next morning brought another shore excursion, a tour of ancient ruins at our first port of call. As planned, Bradley and I arrived just as my husband and Vanessa were boarding the tour bus. The color drained from their faces when they saw us. I smiled brightly and took the seat directly behind them. Good morning. Sleep well. Vanessa stared straight ahead, rigid with tension. My husband attempted a weak smile. Look, we can talk privately. Oh, we'll have plenty of time to talk, I assured him. We have 3 more days together on this lovely ship. No rush. During the tour, Bradley and I maintained pleasant conversation, occasionally directing innocent questions to our uncomfortable companions. Have you visited these ruins before? Isn't the architecture fascinating? Each normal interaction seemed to make them more nervous than a direct confrontation would have. When we returned to the ship, they were visibly unraveling, exchanging tense whispers, looking over their shoulders, jumping at every corner where they spotted us. For that night's formal dinner, I wore a black dress I had bought specifically for this cruise. Elegant, understated, with just enough edge to make a statement. Bradley wore a tailored suit that highlighted all the advantages of his athletic build. We entered the dining room deliberately 15 minutes after my husband and Vanessa had been seated. May we join you? I asked, already pulling out a chair at their table for 2. The maitre d' mentioned you had room. He couldn't refuse without creating a scene. Trapped by social convention, they shifted uncomfortably as we settled in. Wonderful evening, isn't it? Bradley began, unfolding his napkin with practiced ease. Vanessa, that dress looks familiar. Didn't you wear it to the Henderson Charity Gala last month? Her eyes widened slightly. The Henderson Gala had been a work event, one where she had introduced my husband as her colleague. Yes, I think so, she stammered. I flagged down a waiter. Champagne for the table, please. We're celebrating. My husband's expression darkened. What exactly are we celebrating? I smiled, reaching into my purse to pull out the envelope of photos. Anniversaries. Specifically, the 18-month anniversary of your first cruise together. I placed the photos on the table one by one, like dealing cards. Caribbean, March last year. Mediterranean, May. Alaska, July. Each one during what you told me were business trips. The blood drained from his face. How did you? I've always admired your consistency. I continued, my voice steady despite my hammering heart. Same cruise line, often the same cabin category. Made tracking surprisingly easy. Vanessa's hand trembled as she reached for her water glass. Bradley chose that moment to make his contribution. Speaking of consistency, he said, sliding a folder across the table toward Vanessa. I've been reviewing our company's finances. Interesting pattern of withdrawals that coincides with the dates of these cruises. Her glass froze halfway to her lips. That's not. You can't prove. Our investors were quite interested in the documentation, Bradley continued calmly. I had a fascinating call with them yesterday. This was the moment I had prepared for, watching the dawn of understanding that we weren't just angry spouses lashing out. We had been methodical, patient. We had receipts, literally and figuratively. "What do you want?" my husband finally asked, his voice barely audible above the dining room's ambient noise. I leaned forward, maintaining eye contact. "For tonight, just dinner. Pleasant conversation. Maybe you could tell Bradley about your conference schedule for the next few months. I'm sure he'd be interested to know which business trips are actually romantic getaways." They sat frozen, trapped by their own web of lies. As the waiter arrived with champagne, I raised my glass to truth. It always surfaces eventually. During dinner, we maintained cordial conversation, periodically dropping details that confirmed how thoroughly we had investigated their affair. Each revelation felt like a precise incision, small cuts that accumulated into significant damage. By dessert, they both looked physically ill. When we finally stood to leave, I left a room key card on the table. "For your convenience," I explained. "It's for the cabin adjacent to yours. We've been taking turns listening through the wall. The soundproofing is surprisingly poor." My husband's face contorted with the understanding that even their most intimate moments had been compromised. As Bradley and I walked away, he whispered, "That was masterful. But that's just the beginning, isn't it?" I nodded, feeling not joy, but cold satisfaction. Tomorrow we moved to phase 2. Tonight was about showing them we know everything. Tomorrow is about showing them what that knowledge will cost them. Back in my cabin, I finally allowed myself a moment of genuine grief. Not for my husband, but for the life I had believed in. 15 years lost, trust shattered, future plans evaporated. But in its place was something unexpected, a sense of my own power. I had been blindsided by betrayal, but I had responded not with helpless heartbreak, but with calculated action. I sent one final text to Bradley before sleep. "Thank you for today. Tomorrow we show no mercy." His response came immediately. "They created this situation. We're just ensuring they experience the consequences they deserve." I fell asleep to the sound of a muffled argument through the wall, a lullaby of justice beginning to unfold. The third day of the cruise dawned bright and clear, perfect weather for what Bradley and I had planned. While my husband and Vanessa had spent the night arguing, we had been finalizing details with various crew members and other passengers we had recruited to our cause. Our first encounter was at breakfast. We saw them at a corner table, hunched over coffee, looking exhausted and tense. Instead of approaching, we sat prominently in the center of the dining room, laughing and chatting with a group of passengers we had befriended. Specifically, 2 couples who turned out to be from my husband's industry. I exclaimed as we passed their table later, gesturing to our new friends. "Rachel and Diana are from Westbrook Partners. Apparently, they've been trying to reach your company about that merger proposal. What a coincidence finding them here." My husband's coffee cup clattered against its saucer. Westbrook Partners was indeed a major potential client his company had been courting for months. Now they were learning about his business conference while he sat next to his lover. "We're having drinks with them later," Bradley added cheerfully. "You should join us. I'm sure they'd love to hear about your professional commitments." They didn't respond, but the message was clear. Their private affair was becoming increasingly public, with imminent professional consequences. By noon, we had implemented the next phase. During their scheduled couples massage at the ship spa, they arrived to discover their appointment had been accidentally changed to separate treatments in different rooms. Meanwhile, Bradley and I enjoyed their original time slot, having befriended the spa manager with a generous tip and a convincing story about anniversary celebrations. Small disruptions continued throughout the day. Their lunch reservation was mysteriously canceled, their shore excursion overbooked, and their special requests lost in the system. Nothing dramatic enough to blame on sabotage, just a steady stream of inconveniences that were undermining their romantic getaway. But the real turning point came that evening. The ship's program included a passenger talent show followed by a dance contest. Bradley and I had signed up, and we had also entered my husband and Vanessa's names without their knowledge. "Our next contestants," announced the cruise director to the packed lounge, "join us in celebrating a special occasion. Let's welcome David and Vanessa." A spotlight swung to their table, where they sat frozen in horror as their names were called. The crowd applauded enthusiastically. We've heard they're celebrating a special relationship anniversary, the director continued, reading from the card I had submitted. 18 months of relationship bliss. Although, I'm also hearing congratulations are in order for Vanessa's engagement. Wait, that can't be right. Confused murmurs spread through the audience as my husband and Vanessa remained glued to their seats, mortification evident on their faces. Maybe they're feeling shy, Bradley called out from our table. Maybe they'd feel more comfortable if we showed everyone photos of their celebration first? Before they could react, the large screen behind the stage lit up with images. The security camera photos from their previous cruises were interspersed with screenshots of text messages between them planning their rendezvous. I had carefully edited out anything explicitly incriminating, leaving enough context for the audience to piece together the situation. That's not... We didn't authorize. My husband stammered, finally finding his voice as he stood. Oh, one more special photo, I announced, nodding to the AV technician I had befriended. The screen changed to show Vanessa's engagement announcement post, complete with her radiant smile next to Bradley and a massive ring prominently displayed. The date stamp was unmistakable. 6 months into her affair with my husband. The room fell silent as understanding gripped the audience. Then came the whispers, the sideways glances, the judgment. They had avoided this by conducting their affair on anonymous cruises where no one knew them. I think that's our cue, Bradley said, standing and offering me his hand. We should show them how it's done. We took to the dance floor for the competition, performing a tango we had practiced during our planning week. Every dramatic turn and dip was executed with precision, our eyes meeting in a performance of connection that drew enthusiastic applause. When we finished, I saw my husband and Vanessa slip out of the lounge, heads down, unable to face the room full of strangers who now knew their secret. We followed at a distance, watching them argue in a secluded corner of the deck. Their body language told the story. Accusations, denials, recriminations. They are imploding, Bradley observed quietly. Good, I replied, feeling a satisfaction deeper than I'd expected. But we're not finished yet. That night, we implemented the final stage of our ship-based plan. While they were in damage control mode after the public humiliation, I arranged for the ship's photography team to deliver something special to their cabin. A commemorative album we had created using the ship's photo service. Inside were professional photos taken throughout the cruise. Candid shots of their arguments, their tense body language, and their obvious discomfort as Bradley and I appeared in frame after frame. The photographers had been generously compensated to capture these moments discreetly. The album's title was engraved in elegant script, When Truth Surfaced, A Journey of Discovery. We watched from the hallway as a steward delivered the package through the crack of their door. I glimpsed my husband's face when he opened it. The dawn of recognition, the descent into defeat. But the real culmination came the next morning as the ship prepared to dock at our final port of call. Bradley and I had arranged for a special announcement over the ship's PA system. Attention passengers. If David and Vanessa could please report to the purser's office regarding an urgent matter with their disembarkation documents. When they arrived, visibly anxious, they found not just the purser but also a representative from the cruise line's corporate office who happened to be aboard. Another fortunate connection we had made. Mr. David, Ms. Vanessa. The representative began formally. It has come to our attention that you may have used fraudulent information when booking this cruise. My husband frowned. What are you talking about? Your booking indicates this trip was reserved through your company as a business expense with tax documentation filed accordingly. However, the nature of your stay appears to be personal rather than professional. Vanessa paled. That's not... We didn't. Furthermore, the representative continued, there's the matter of using company credit cards for non-business expenses, which has been flagged by your company's compliance department. Bradley and I watched from a discreet distance as my husband's professional world began collapsing in real time. The evidence we had gathered, including email exchanges I had forwarded to his company's ethics hotline, had triggered an internal investigation. Meanwhile, Vanessa received her own devastating news. Her access to their startup's financial accounts had been frozen pending an audit directed by investors. Bradley had moved quickly, and her financial manipulations were now under scrutiny. As they stood there, their carefully constructed parallel lives disintegrating around them, I felt a strange elation. Not happiness, not exactly vindication, but a deep sense of justice. "This isn't just about the betrayal," I said quietly to Bradley as we watched from afar. "It's about the calculation, the premeditation, the years of lies." He nodded. "They thought they were too smart to get caught, too arrogant to face consequences." "Do you regret anything?" he asked, suddenly curious about my feelings now that our plan was nearing its end. I considered this for a moment. "I regret trusting someone who didn't deserve it. I regret not seeing the signs earlier. But this," I gestured toward the scene unfolding, "this I don't regret at all." When my husband and Vanessa emerged from the purser's office, their faces ashen with the understanding that their actions had real-world consequences beyond their romantic entanglement, I stepped into their path. "Enjoy the cruise?" I asked, my voice steady and clear. My husband looked at me with new eyes. Not anger or defiance, but something like fear. Fear of what else I might know, what else I might have done. "This is just the beginning," I told him quietly. "When we dock tomorrow, you'll find your belongings packed and waiting at a hotel. The locks have been changed. Divorce papers are with my lawyer, and every member of our family and social circle has received a detailed account of how and why our marriage ended." I turned to Vanessa. "As for you, I wonder if your wedding vendors will refund your deposits. Bradley tells me he's been quite thorough in his communications with them." She flinched as if I had slapped her. "The thing about betrayal," I continued, addressing both of them, "is that it shows who people really are. You both showed me exactly who you are. I'm just making sure everyone else sees it, too." With that, Bradley and I walked away, leaving them standing in shock in our wake. That night, our final night on the ship, we dined at the captain's table. The reservation originally made for my husband and Vanessa, now transferred to us through the connections we had cultivated. "To new beginnings," Bradley proposed, raising his glass. I clinked mine against his, feeling lighter than I had in years. "And to truth, no matter how painful, always setting you free." 6 months after that fateful cruise, I stood on a different deck. This one belonged to my new waterfront condo. The ocean stretched before me, infinite and uncertain, like my future. But for the first time in a long while, that uncertainty felt exhilarating rather than terrifying. The divorce had been finalized with surprising speed. My husband, faced with the mountain of evidence I had gathered and the professional embarrassment already unfolding, hadn't contested any of my terms. His affair had cost him more than just his marriage. The ethics investigation at his company had resulted in a demotion and professional censure. The cruise line had also banned him from future bookings after determining he had indeed committed fraud with his business expense claims. As for Vanessa, her story had unraveled even more dramatically. The financial irregularities Bradley had uncovered were just the tip of the iceberg. Once investors began looking closely at their startup's books, they found a pattern of embezzlement that led to criminal charges. Her wedding, needless to say, never materialized, though the canceled vendor contracts and non-refundable deposits had created a financial burden that compounded her legal troubles. I sipped my morning coffee, watching seagulls wheel against the clear blue sky. My phone chimed with a text from Bradley. "Just landed. Still on for lunch." Our relationship had evolved in unexpected ways since the cruise. Not romantically. We were both too scarred for that leap, but into something equally valuable. A genuine friendship forged in the crucible of shared betrayal and recovery. We had stayed in contact through the aftermath, supporting each other through divorce proceedings, legal complications, and the emotional turbulence of rebuilding our lives. He had relocated to open a new office of his now thriving company in my coastal city, a business decision that had coincided with my own relocation after the divorce. "See you at the Pier restaurant at 1, I texted back. As I prepared for our lunch, I reflected on how differently things had turned out from what either of us had expected when we boarded that cruise 6 months earlier, consumed with anger and betrayal. Neither of us had imagined emerging stronger or finding a genuine connection with each other. The Pier restaurant was busy when I arrived, but Bradley had secured our usual table on the patio. He stood when he saw me, his smile genuine. "The Tokyo deal closed," he announced as I sat down. "The investors are thrilled. Congratulations." I raised my water glass in a mock toast. Not bad for someone whose fiancé tried to sink his company. He laughed, a sound that had become more frequent as the months passed. "Speaking of sinking, did you hear anything about our favorite couple?" I shook my head. "Not directly, but Caroline mentioned seeing David at a conference last month. Apparently, he's lost weight and looks haunted." Caroline, my former neighbor, had stayed firmly in my corner during the divorce. "Vanessa's plea agreement was finalized," Bradley replied. "Probation, restitution, and community service. Her parents had to mortgage their house for her legal fees." We exchanged these updates not with malice, but with the detached interest of people who had moved beyond the need for revenge. Satisfaction had faded into something more valuable: indifference. Our meal arrived, and conversation shifted to our current lives. My new consulting business, his expansion plans, the charity gala we would both attend next weekend. "I've been meaning to ask," Bradley said as we finished dessert. "That cruise line sent me a promotional email yesterday. Caribbean itinerary, special offer for holiday travel." I raised an eyebrow. "Planning another revenge cruise so soon?" "Actually," he said, his expression turning serious, "I was thinking about reclaiming the experience. A trip with no agenda or manipulation, just enjoyment." "Sounds good," I replied, surprised by his suggestion. "Would you consider coming as friends?" he added quickly. "I think we both deserve to experience a cruise that isn't organized around someone else's betrayal." I considered his offer, this unexpected invitation to revisit the scene of our strange alliance. 6 months ago, I would have recoiled at the idea. Now I found myself nodding. "I'd like that," I said simply. As we walked along the waterfront after lunch, I realized something profound had shifted. The cruise that was meant to expose betrayal had inadvertently revealed something entirely different: my own resilience. I had survived not just my husband's infidelity, but the collapse of a future I had believed in completely. "You know what?" I said, as we paused to watch sailboats in the harbor. "Sometimes I almost want to thank them." Bradley looked surprised. "Thank them for what?" "For forcing me to become someone stronger than I ever knew I could be. For inadvertently introducing me to a true friend." I gestured between us. "Their betrayal was painful, but what came after? I wouldn't change it for anything." He nodded slowly. "I've had the same thought. If Vanessa hadn't cheated, I'd be married to someone who was willing to steal from our company and lie to my face daily. Instead, I'm here rebuilding something authentic." The sun gleamed on the water, casting everything in golden light. In that moment, I realized the most unexpected outcome of all. True closure doesn't come from revenge, however satisfying it might be. It comes from building something new from the wreckage, something honest and real. "So," Bradley said, checking his watch, "I should head back for my conference call. But about that cruise, winter vacation, New Year's itinerary." I smiled, feeling a lightness that had once seemed impossible. New Year sounds perfect, an appropriate way to start the next chapter. As we said goodbye, I took one last look at the ocean, the same ocean we had sailed during that fateful cruise. The water that had carried us through betrayal now stretched before me as a symbol of possibility. The horizon was open, the future unwritten, and for the first time in years, I was genuinely excited to see what came next. Now on to the next story. Story 3. I was sitting at the kitchen table staring at my bank app, watching the number on the screen like it was a cruel joke. 1 second it was there, years of savings, the little safety net I'd been building since my son was born, and the next it was gone. Not withdrawn for a mortgage payment, not an emergency expense, not anything I had authorized. Just gone. Took me 30 seconds to connect the dots. 30 seconds to remember the conversation I'd had with my younger brother, Liam, 2 nights ago, where he casually mentioned how tight things were with him and his girlfriend and asked if I could spot him just a little. I had told him no, not because I didn't care, but because I couldn't. Rent, groceries, my son's school supplies, that money wasn't extra. It was survival money. And now it was gone anyway. My name's Aaron. I'm 36. And for the past few years, I've been raising my son, Jacob, on my own. His mom and I split when he was a toddler. Nothing dramatic. We just weren't good for each other and she moved across the country. We've kept things civil, but day to day it's just me and Jake. I work a decent but demanding job in IT. And we live in a small 2-bedroom rental that I've slowly been turning into a real home. A place that feels safe. A place I promised myself would never be touched by the chaos my brother seems to carry around like a storm cloud. Liam and I were close once. We grew up in a rough house. Dad left early. Mom worked double shifts. And a lot of the time it felt like we were raising each other. He was the goofy one, the dreamer, the kid who could talk himself out of detention and into someone else's snack stash. But somewhere along the way, that charm turned into manipulation. The past 5 years have been a carousel of short-lived jobs, bad girlfriends, and calls at 11 p.m. asking if I could cover his bills just until Friday. I had bailed him out more times than I could count, and every time I told myself it would be the last. This time really was the last. I called him 3 times. No answer. By the 4th, my call went straight to voicemail. I tried to breathe, but my chest felt like it had a brick sitting on it. This wasn't just some casual borrowing. This was my entire savings. The emergency fund I'd been so proud of. The thing that let me sleep at night knowing that if something went wrong, I could still keep the lights on. Dad. Jake's small voice cut through my spiral. He was standing in the doorway in his superhero pajamas, holding his tablet. He's 10, but sometimes he looks at me like he's 40, like he knows exactly what I'm thinking before I say it. You look mad. I wanted to lie, to tell him everything was fine, but my voice cracked when I said, Buddy, Uncle Liam took our money. He frowned, processing that for a second, and then asked, Like all of it? Yeah, I admitted, and saying it out loud made my stomach twist. Jake was quiet for a moment, then climbed up onto the chair across from me and put his elbows on the table like we were about to have a serious business meeting. Okay, he said finally in this calm little voice that didn't match the storm in my chest. Then we take care of it. It almost made me laugh, the confidence in his tone. But before I could say anything, my phone buzzed with a text from Liam. Hey man, don't freak out. I'll pay you back. Just needed a fresh start. Heading out west with Maddie. Wish us luck. No apology. No explanation. No timeline for repayment. Just that. I didn't text him back. Couldn't. Instead, I sat there at the kitchen table until long after Jake went to bed, staring at that message and feeling a weird mix of rage, grief, and something heavier. Betrayal. This wasn't just about money. This was my brother deciding that his impulsive road trip with his girlfriend mattered more than the roof over my kid's head. The next morning, I started making calls to the bank, to the police, to anyone who could tell me what recourse I had. The answer was the same every time. Because Liam technically had joint access to that account from when we'd set it up years ago for shared family expenses, it wasn't considered theft. Legally, he had as much right to that money as I did. I can't even describe the helplessness that washed over me. It was like being mugged in broad daylight and then having the cops tell you, well, you were both standing on the sidewalk. So by that night, I felt hollow. But Jake wasn't done. I found him sitting cross-legged on the living room floor with his laptop open, typing furiously. What are you doing, kiddo? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He glanced up, totally casual, and said, just taking care of it. I wanted to press him, but he had that look. The same stubborn look I get when I've decided something is non-negotiable. So I let it go. 2 days later, there was a knock at my door. Loud, desperate. When I opened it, Liam was standing there, eyes red, looking like he hadn't slept in a week. Aaron, man, we need to talk, he said, his voice cracking. And behind him, parked at the curb, was a car I didn't recognize with someone sitting inside waiting. That was the moment my stomach dropped, because whatever had just happened, it was big enough to make my brother cry. I didn't let him in right away. There was this beat of silence where we just stared at each other. And for a second, I think Liam thought I was going to slam the door in his face. And honestly, a part of me wanted to, but then I caught sight of the car behind him. Some beat-up sedan with a girl in the passenger seat, head in her hands, clearly crying. And I stepped aside. 5 minutes, I said, my voice flat. He came inside like he was carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. His clothes were wrinkled, his hair sticking out in every direction, and he smelled faintly like gasoline and fast food. That combination of desperation and road trip grime. "Where's Jake?" he asked, looking around. "In his room, asleep." I crossed my arms. "Talk." Liam sat down at the kitchen table, the same table where I'd been when I first realized what he'd done, and put his head in his hands. "I messed up, man. Like, big time." I didn't say anything. I just waited. He finally looked up at me, eyes bloodshot. "The money's gone." I almost laughed. Gone. Like it hadn't been gone the second he hit that transfer button. "You mean you spent it?" I said, voice cold. "No." "Well, yes, some of it, but most of it's... I don't even know. Maddie convinced me to put it into this investment thing one of her friends was doing. Said it was a guaranteed double. It was supposed to be safe, but it was a scam. All of it. They took everything and disappeared." I leaned back in my chair, feeling my jaw clench. "So, let me get this straight. You stole from me, drained every cent I had, took off with your girlfriend, and then handed the money to a stranger because she said it was a good idea." He winced at the word stole, but didn't argue. "You don't understand, Aaron," he said, voice rising. "We were going to make it right. This was supposed to be the thing that fixed everything. I was going to pay you back double. I was going to finally get out of this hole." I slammed my hand on the table hard enough that the sound echoed through the apartment. "You don't get to talk about fixing things when you're the one who broke them in the first place." That shut him up for a moment. We sat there in silence, the kind that feels too loud. I could hear the faint hum of Jake's white noise machine down the hall. My chest was tight, my pulse hammering in my ears. And then he said it, the thing that made something in me snap. "You always act like you're better than me. Like just because you've got the kid and the steady job, you're the responsible one. But you wouldn't even help me when I asked. What kind of brother does that?" I laughed, sharp and humorless. "What kind of brother steals from the only family that still talks to him?" He flinched but pressed on. "You think you've got it so hard? Try living without anyone in your corner. Mom and Dad always took your side. You always had the grades, the job, the girl. Stop acting like this is about childhood jealousy." I snapped. "You're 32 years old, Liam. You made this choice. You don't get to play the victim." He stood up so fast his chair scraped against the floor. "I came here because I thought maybe we could work this out. But clearly you just want to sit there on your high horse. Fine. Don't help me. See where that gets you when things really hit the fan." And then he stormed out, slamming the door behind him so hard that a picture frame rattled on the wall. I stood there for a minute, breathing hard, before I realized Jake was awake. He was standing in the hallway, rubbing his eyes, looking small and worried. "Hey," I said softly, trying to calm myself down. "It's okay, buddy. Go back to bed." He didn't move. "Did he yell at you?" "Yeah," I admitted. "But it's okay. He's gone now." Jake hesitated, then said, "He's just mad because he got caught. Don't feel bad." And then he padded back to his room, leaving me standing there in the kitchen feeling like I'd just been hit by a truck. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Liam's face. Angry, desperate, and just a little bit scared. And somewhere under the anger, I felt that tiny pang of guilt I always get when I stand up to him. It's like muscle memory from when we were kids, like I'm breaking some unwritten rule about keeping the peace. The next day, I found out Liam had gone to our mother's house. I know because she called me. "Aaron," she said, voice clipped. "Your brother just came by, crying his eyes out. He told me what happened. How could you let him get into a situation like this?" I closed my eyes and counted to 3 before answering. "Mom, he took my savings. He didn't ask. He didn't warn me. And now he's trying to make me feel bad about not helping him more." "He's your brother," she said sharply. "Family is supposed to help family. Family doesn't bankrupt each other. There was a pause, then a sigh. You've always been so hard on him. I hung up, not rudely, but firmly. Because if I didn't, I was going to say something I couldn't take back. That night, Jake came into the living room with that same mysterious look on his face. It's almost done, he said. What's almost done? I asked. He grinned. You'll see. Before I could ask more, my phone buzzed again. Another text from Liam. This one just said, you better fix this before I do. That sent a chill down my spine because Liam was reckless. And when he said stuff like that, he usually meant it. And that's when I realized this wasn't just about money anymore. This was about control, about him trying to scare me into doing what he wanted. The next morning, someone knocked on my door again. Not a desperate late-night knock this time, but a deliberate 3-beat rhythm. When I opened it, it wasn't Liam. It was Maddie, and she looked worse than he had. Her mascara was streaked down her cheeks, and her hands were shaking as she held out a crumpled envelope. I can't do this anymore, she said. That's when I knew things were about to get a whole lot messier. Maddie's hands were trembling so badly, I had to take the envelope from her before it slipped. She wouldn't meet my eyes, just stared at the ground like a kid caught sneaking out after curfew. Can I come in? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I hesitated for a moment. She wasn't my favorite person in the world, but she wasn't the one who hit the transfer button. Finally, I stepped aside and let her in. She sank into the chair at the kitchen table, looking like she hadn't eaten in days. I opened the envelope. Inside were a handful of crumpled receipts, a gas station coffee-stained napkin with numbers scribbled on it, and a printed-out email. The email was from some generic-looking crypto investment platform, thanking them for their deposit and confirming their account had been successfully opened. I felt my stomach twist. How much did you put in? I asked. Maddie flinched. All of it. I dropped the papers on the table and ran my hand through my hair, trying to process. All of it. As in everything, she said quickly, almost defensively. Look, it wasn't just me. Liam said it was the fastest way to get the money back to you. He said you'd be proud if we doubled it and paid you back right away. My laugh came out sharp and ugly. Proud? You think I'd be proud of you two gambling away every cent I had? It wasn't gambling, she shot back, her eyes finally flashing. It was a guaranteed return. At least that's what we thought. Until... Her voice cracked and she buried her face in her hands. Until what? I demanded. She looked up at me then, tears streaming down her face. Until Liam pulled the rest of the money out and wired it straight to his own account. He said he didn't trust leaving it there after what happened to the first chunk. I thought he was going to give it back to you, but then he bought a car and some stuff for us. Clothes, hotel rooms. We were in California for 2 days, Aaron. 2 days before he blew through most of it. I stared at her, my mind going blank for a moment. So let me get this straight. He didn't just lose the money. He spent what was left. Maddie nodded miserably. I gripped the back of the chair so hard my knuckles went white. There was this ringing in my ears like the world had just gone quiet except for the sound of my own pulse. And then, as if on cue, my phone buzzed. A message from Liam. I need more. If you don't send something by tonight, I'll come get it myself. I turned the phone around and showed Maddie. This is what he's doing while you're here crying. She bit her lip. He doesn't know I came here. He thinks I'm at the motel. That was when I felt it. That snapping sensation inside, like the last frayed thread finally giving way. Up until now, I'd been angry, but somewhere in the back of my mind, I was still treating this like a fight we'd recover from. Brothers fight, right? Brothers make stupid choices and sometimes they even betray you. But there's always that chance to patch things up later. Not anymore. This wasn't just him making a mistake. This was him burning every bridge I had left to offer. Jake must have heard voices because he wandered out of his room, rubbing his eyes. What's going on? He asked, looking from me to Maddie. Maddie wiped her face quickly. Nothing, sweetie. Just talking. But Jake's too smart for that. He looked at me, waiting. I crouched down so we were eye level. Uncle Liam spent all the money, I said quietly. And now he's asking for more. Jake's expression hardened in a way I didn't expect from a 10-year-old. Then he's not allowed here anymore. I almost smiled at how simple he made it sound. It's not that easy, I said softly. He tilted his head. Yes, it is. Then he looked at Maddie. Are you on his side? She froze for a second, then shook her head. Not anymore. Jake nodded once, like that settled something in his mind, and disappeared back into his room. I sat down across from Maddie again. You need to leave him, I said bluntly. Her eyes widened. What? You came here because you're scared, I said. You know this is out of control. He's going to keep digging until there's nothing left for anyone. And if you stay, he's going to drag you down with him. I can't just leave him, she whispered. Then don't, I said, standing. But don't come here again if you're going to keep helping him. I can't protect you from what's coming. She stared at me for a long moment, then stood too. You really think he'd hurt you? I didn't answer. She left without another word, and I stood in the doorway, watching her get into that rusted sedan and drive off. For the rest of the night, I paced. My mind kept replaying every memory I had of Liam. The time he lied to get me grounded so he could go to a party. The time he borrowed my car and came back with a dent. The time he charmed my last $50 out of me with some sob story about overdue rent. And all those times I forgave him. But this time was different. This time there was no forgiveness coming. Just before midnight, I heard footsteps outside my apartment door. Slow, heavy, deliberate. When I looked through the peephole, Liam was standing there. And this time he wasn't crying. He was smiling. And that was somehow so much worse. I stood there with my eye pressed to the peephole for what felt like a full minute, just watching him. Liam didn't knock this time. He just stood there grinning, hands shoved in the pockets of his hoodie, rocking back and forth on his heels like he had all the time in the world. I didn't open the door. Something about that smile told me that if I let him in, I'd regret it. Eventually, he leaned forward, close enough that I could see the shadows under his eyes, and said just loud enough for me to hear through the door, "You can't ignore me forever, Aaron. This isn't over." Then he turned and walked away, whistling. I didn't sleep at all that night. I sat on the couch in the dark, every muscle tense, listening for footsteps, half convinced he'd come back and try the door. I kept replaying Maddie's words in my head. He pulled the rest of the money out and wired it to himself. And that message he sent me threatening to come get it himself. What did that even mean? Was he talking about more money? Something worse? By morning, I felt like I'd been hit by a truck. I called in sick to work, which I never do, just so I could stay home and keep an eye on things. Around noon, I caught myself sitting at the kitchen table with my laptop open, staring at my online banking page again, like maybe the money would magically reappear. Of course it didn't. Then the call came. "Mom, Aaron," she said before I could even say hello. "Your brother just stopped by. He's in bad shape. He said you kicked him out and refused to help. What's wrong with you?" I closed my eyes, pinching the bridge of my nose. "What's wrong with me, Mom? He stole my entire savings. That's what's wrong with me." "You make it sound so dramatic," she snapped. "He just borrowed it." "Borrowing involves asking first," I said flatly. "You've always been so cold with him," she said, her tone shifting into that disappointed mother voice that still makes me feel 10 years old. "You know he's had a harder life than you." I almost dropped the phone. "A harder life? Mom, we grew up in the same house. You had school, you had sports, you had friends," she shot back. "He had none of that." I just sat there, stunned. And whose fault is that? Because it wasn't mine. But she wasn't listening. "I'm telling you, Aaron, you need to make this right. He's family. You can't just turn your back on him." That was the moment it really hit me. Mom wasn't going to take my side. She never had. Not really. Even as kids, whenever there was trouble, she'd sigh and tell me to be the bigger person. And I always was. I was the one who gave up the last slice of pizza. The one who took the blame when something got broken. The one who stayed up late helping him with homework he didn't want to do. And now she wanted me to fix the mess he made of my life. "I can't talk about this anymore," I said finally and hung up before she could say anything else. I must have sat there for another hour just staring at the wall. My chest felt heavy, like someone had placed a weight right on top of me. For the first time since all of this started, I didn't feel angry. I just felt empty. Around 3 o'clock, Jake came into the kitchen and slid a plate of crackers and cheese toward me. "You forgot to eat lunch," he said simply. I blinked at the plate, realizing I hadn't eaten breakfast either. "Thanks, buddy," I said softly, and forced myself to take a bite. After that, I made myself get up and shower, even though it felt pointless. Then, I went into my bedroom and pulled out the fireproof box I keep under my bed, the one with all my important documents, and laid everything out on the bed. Birth certificate, insurance papers, lease agreement, the file with my life insurance policy. I sat there staring at it all, heart pounding. If Liam was willing to drain my account and then show up at my door smiling, what would stop him from trying to use my name to open something else? Get credit cards in my name, take out loans. The thought made me cold all over. I spent the next 2 hours freezing every account I could, changing passwords, adding extra security measures. By the time I was done, my hands were shaking from the adrenaline. But for the first time in days, I felt like I'd taken back a little bit of control. That night, I packed a go bag for Jake and me. Just essentials. A change of clothes, toothbrushes, some cash. I didn't know if I'd need it, but it made me feel better knowing I had it. Around midnight, I was sitting on the couch with the lights off when I heard it. The sound of something hitting my window. Not hard enough to break it, but enough to make me freeze. I crept over and peeked through the blinds. There was Liam standing in the yard, tossing little pebbles at the window like some twisted version of a rom-com character. When he saw me looking, he waved and grinned. "Open up, man," he called softly, just loud enough for me to hear. "We need to talk." I didn't move. After a minute, his smile faded. He stood there for a moment longer, then turned and walked away into the night. I didn't sleep again. By morning, I'd made up my mind. I couldn't keep living like this, waiting for the next knock at the door. I started researching lawyers. If I couldn't press criminal charges, maybe there was something else I could do. Some kind of civil action. Anything that would put a legal barrier between us. It felt like rock bottom. Sitting there with my laptop, Jake at school, my apartment too quiet. But somewhere deep down, a small part of me was already planning my next move. I wasn't going to let Liam keep running my life. And I definitely wasn't going to let him teach Jake that this was how family was supposed to work. Late that afternoon, Maddie texted me just 3 words. "He's getting worse." And then, "Be careful tonight." When I read Maddie's text, I felt something shift inside me. Up until now, I'd been reacting to everything. Putting out fires, trying to survive one disaster after another. But this was different. This was a warning. And if Maddie was scared enough to warn me, that meant something was about to break. I put my phone down, sat back in the chair, and just breathed for a minute. Then I started making calls. The first one was to a lawyer. I explained everything. The joint account, the drained savings, the threatening texts. She didn't promise miracles, but she gave me something I hadn't had in weeks. A plan. Step 1 was to formally remove Liam's name from anything with my signature on it. Step 2 was to file a cease and desist letter to put him on notice that any further contact or harassment could be grounds for legal action. It wasn't revenge yet, but it was the first brick in a wall I was building between my family and his chaos. The next call I made was to my bank. I set up a completely new account under just my name, moved what little money I had left there, and asked them to flag any attempts at joint access or withdrawals as fraudulent. I even arranged for new debit cards to be sent to my office instead of my home just in case Liam tried to intercept them. When Jake got home from school, I sat him down at the table. "Buddy, we're going to be okay," I said. He looked at me skeptically, like he could see right through me. "Did something happen?" "Nothing bad," I said carefully. "But we're going to make some changes. We're going to keep our stuff safe." He thought about that for a moment, then nodded. "Good. Because I finished what I was working on." I raised an eyebrow. "You still haven't told me what that is." He grinned. "You'll see." Then he ran off to his room, leaving me sitting there shaking my head. That night, I started feeling a little lighter. It wasn't like my savings had magically reappeared. They hadn't. But for the first time since this whole nightmare began, I felt like I wasn't just sitting around waiting for the next blow. I was doing something. The next morning, I got a call from Maddie. "I left him," she said, her voice shaky but determined. "I packed my stuff while he was out and got a bus ticket. I'm staying with my cousin for a while." "That's good, Maddie," I said, and I meant it. "You should know. He's furious, like scarier than I've ever seen him. He was throwing things when he came back and realized I was gone. If I were you, I'd keep the doors locked." I swallowed hard. "I always do." She was quiet for a second, then said, "He's not just angry about the money anymore. He thinks you turned me against him." I almost laughed at that. I didn't have to. He did that all by himself. Still, her words stayed with me after we hung up. Because I knew Liam. When he lost control, he lashed out. And if Maddie wasn't there to absorb it, that meant I was his next target. But this time, I wasn't going to be an easy one. Over the next week, I threw myself into work, picking up overtime where I could. Every extra dollar went into the new account. It wasn't much, but watching that number tick upward felt like taking back a little piece of what Liam had taken from me. I also started talking to a financial advisor my lawyer recommended. She walked me through setting up a trust account for Jake's future, one that Liam wouldn't be able to touch even if he tried. It felt good taking that step, like I was building something solid again after everything had been ripped away. One night, a few days later, I found Jake in the living room with his laptop open, a spreadsheet on the screen. "What's that?" I asked, curious. He grinned. "Remember how you said Uncle Liam took the money? Well, I figured out where some of it went." I blinked. "You what?" "I used the login info you always keep on the fridge," he said proudly. "I tracked the transactions. I even saved screenshots." I sat down next to him, staring at the screen. He'd built a neat little timeline of every withdrawal, every transfer, even the payment for that car Maddie mentioned. "This is impressive," I said honestly. He shrugged. "I just wanted to help. And now you can prove it was him, right?" My chest tightened. "Yeah, buddy. Now I can prove it was him." That night, I printed every single screenshot and put them in a folder labeled Evidence. I didn't know yet exactly how I'd use it, but just holding that folder felt like holding a weapon. The turning point came a few days later. Liam texted me again. Another demand for money, this one nastier than the last. Instead of panicking, I took a deep breath, snapped a photo of the folder, and sent it to him with one line. "Try me again and see what happens." His reply came fast. "You wouldn't dare." I didn't answer. For the first time, I felt like I had the upper hand. A few days later, my lawyer called to say the cease and desist had been served. If Liam tried to contact me again, it could be considered harassment. That night, I actually slept not all the way through. I still woke up a few times out of habit, listening for footsteps. But when morning came, I didn't feel crushed under that weight anymore. Jake noticed, too. "You're smiling again," he said at breakfast, almost surprised. "Yeah," I said, ruffling his hair. "Feels good, doesn't it?" And for the first time since this whole mess started, it really did. But just as I started to feel like maybe we'd weathered the worst of it, the next storm came rolling in. It was a Thursday night when I got home from work and found a folded piece of paper tucked into my doorframe. No envelope, no signature. Inside, in Liam's messy handwriting, were 6 words that made my stomach drop. "You think you've won? Watch me." I must have read those 6 words 100 times, my fingers gripping the paper until it crumpled. "You think you've won? Watch me." It wasn't just a threat. It was a promise. I stood there in the doorway, the evening air cold against the back of my neck, and felt that familiar mix of anger and fear start to rise. Only this time, the fear didn't win. I flattened the note, took a photo for my records, and tucked it into the evidence folder. Then I locked the door, sat down at the table, and started writing. Not a letter, a list. Every single thing Liam had done in order. The drained account, the threatening texts, the unannounced visits, the note I just found. The more I wrote, the clearer it became that this wasn't just a family spat anymore. This was harassment. The next morning, I called my lawyer and told her about the note. She didn't hesitate. "This is exactly why we filed that cease and desist," she said. "Document it all. If he escalates again, we can take this to court and request a protective order." Protective order. I let those words roll around in my head all day. The thought of having a legal document that could actually keep Liam away from us, that was power. That evening, after Jake went to bed, I sat in the living room with my laptop and started digging deeper into the transactions Jake had found. Most of them were small enough to seem unremarkable. Hotel charges, gas stations, restaurants. But one stood out. A $4,200 transfer to a used car dealership 3 counties over. I clicked through their website and, after a little searching, found the exact car Liam had bought. A black 2011 Dodge Challenger with a price tag that made my stomach turn. But then I noticed something interesting. The dealership had a policy listed on their site. If a buyer failed to make their payment within 30 days of purchase, the car could be repossessed. An idea started forming in my head. The next day, I called the dealership, pretending to be a concerned relative who wanted to make sure the vehicle was properly insured. They wouldn't give me much, privacy laws and all that. But they did confirm something crucial. The car wasn't fully paid off. Liam had financed part of it, which meant if he missed a single payment, the dealership could take it back. I hung up with a slow smile spreading across my face. That night, Maddie called me again. Her voice sounded steadier than before. "I think you should know," she said. "He's been bragging about that car to everyone. Showing off, driving like a maniac. I heard he already got a warning from the cops for peeling out in a parking lot." "Perfect. Thanks, Maddie," I said. "And hey, good for you getting out when you did." "I should have done it sooner," she said with a bitter laugh. "He's not going to stop until someone makes him." "Then maybe it's time someone did," I said quietly. Over the next few days, I worked with my lawyer to prepare everything we'd need to take this to the next level. Between the screenshots Jake had collected, the threatening texts, and now the note, we had a solid case to present to a judge. I also started talking to the financial advisor again, this time about locking down my credit entirely. We put a freeze on my reports with all 3 major bureaus so Liam couldn't open anything in my name. Piece by piece, I was taking back control. Jake noticed the change. "You don't look scared anymore," he said one night as we were eating dinner. "I'm not," I told him honestly. "Not because what your uncle did wasn't wrong. It was. But because now we know how to deal with it." Jake grinned. "Good. Because I made a backup of all the screenshots on a flash drive, just in case." I couldn't help but laugh. "You're 10 years old and you think like a detective." He shrugged. "Someone has to." The turning point came a few days later when I got a call from the dealership again. "Sir," the man on the phone said carefully, "we're calling as a courtesy to let you know the payment on the Challenger is now officially overdue." I thanked him, hung up, and sat there in silence for a moment. Then I pulled out my phone and opened my camera roll to the photo of Liam's smiling face through the peephole. I stared at it for a long time, then at the folder full of evidence on my kitchen table. For the first time since this whole mess began, I wasn't dreading the next knock at my door. I was waiting for it, and when it came, because I knew it would, I planned to be ready. That night, I pulled out a legal pad and started sketching out what I could only describe as a strategy. If Liam wanted to escalate, I was going to escalate smarter. The car was leverage. The evidence folder was leverage. And now I had Maddie, who seemed more than willing to testify about where the money went if it came to that. I even started quietly talking to a few people I knew in town. A friend who worked at the police department, a neighbor who had cameras facing the parking lot. Just to make sure if things went south, I'd have witnesses. I wasn't just protecting myself anymore. I was building a case. Late one evening, I found Jake sitting cross-legged on the couch with his laptop again. "You know," he said without looking up, "if Uncle Liam keeps driving that car like he is, he's going to get it impounded sooner or later." I smiled faintly. "Maybe sooner than he thinks." Jake looked up at me then, his grin mischievous. "Good, because this time we weren't just surviving. We were preparing. And when the day finally came that Liam tried to push us one step too far, I planned to push back so hard he'd never see it coming." The knock came 3 nights later. I'd been expecting it, but it still made my pulse spike. This time, though, I wasn't caught off guard. I had the folder of evidence laid out on the table, my phone in one hand, and the number for the non-emergency police line already queued up just in case. When I opened the door, Liam was standing there looking ragged. The smug grin was gone, replaced by a simmering anger that made his jaw twitch. He didn't even wait for an invitation. He pushed his way inside like he owned the place. "You've been talking to Maddie," he said, his voice low and tight. I closed the door behind him slowly. "She came to me. Probably because you scared her off." "She had no right," he snapped. "None of this would have happened if you'd just helped me when I asked." I let out a short, humorless laugh. "Helped you, Liam? You stole from me. You didn't ask. You didn't give me a choice. You think you're better than me?" he said, stepping closer, his finger jabbing at my chest. "Always have. But you're not. You're just lucky. And now you're sitting on your high horse acting like I ruined your life." "You didn't ruin my life," I said evenly. "You just made me realize who you really are." That seemed to throw him for a second. He blinked, taken aback. "You think you can just cut me off? I'm your brother." "You were my brother," I said quietly, "until you made it impossible to trust you." He sneered. "What are you going to do? Call the cops? Tell them your little sob story?" I didn't rise to the bait. Instead, I walked over to the table, picked up the folder, and handed it to him. "Go ahead, look." He opened it, flipping through the printed screenshots, the note he left me, the record of every transfer and hotel stay. His face went from defiant to pale as the weight of it sank in. "You've been keeping track of everything," he muttered. "Yes," I said simply. "And my lawyer has a copy too. So does my financial advisor. So if anything happens to me or to Jake, this doesn't just disappear. You don't get to scare me into silence." He dropped the folder on the table and took a step back, running a hand through his hair. "You think this scares me?" "No," I said, my voice calm and deliberate. "I think it scares you that, for once, you don't have the upper hand. You can't talk your way out of this, Liam. You can't guilt me or Mom into bailing you out. I've locked every account, froze my credit, and I've got every piece of proof I need to take you to court if you so much as breathe in my direction again." He opened his mouth, probably to argue, but I didn't give him the chance. I reached for my phone and pressed call. "Non-emergency police line," the operator said. "Yes," I said, keeping my eyes locked on Liam. "I need to report a violation of a cease and desist letter. The subject is here at my apartment right now." That got him. His face went from angry to panicked in an instant. "You're calling the cops on me?" he hissed. "Yes," I said as calmly as if I just confirmed a pizza order. He backed toward the door. "Fine. I'm leaving, but this isn't over." "Oh, it's over," I said, finally letting the steel into my voice. "Because if you ever come near me or Jake again, the next call I make won't be the non-emergency line." He stood there for a second, breathing hard, then turned and stormed out. I watched from the window as he got into the Challenger, revved the engine, and tore out of the parking lot so fast his tires squealed. An hour later, I got a call from Maddie. "You'll never guess what just happened," she said. "Try me," I replied, still feeling the adrenaline humming in my veins. "He just got pulled over. My cousin's friend saw it. Said they were writing him up for reckless driving. And if he doesn't pay the fine," she trailed off, "they'll report it to the dealership," I finished for her. Which meant that shiny black Challenger, the one he'd been showing off to everyone, was officially on borrowed time. I thanked Maddie, hung up, and went back to the table where the folder still lay open. For the first time since all of this began, I felt like I could breathe. I wasn't just reacting anymore. I was setting the tone. Jake came out of his room, rubbing his eyes. "Did he leave?" "Yeah," I said softly. "And he's not coming back." Jake studied my face for a second, then nodded. "Good." He didn't need to know the details, not yet. But when he went back to bed, I sat there in the quiet apartment, the evidence folder spread out before me, and started thinking about my next move. Because this wasn't just about protecting myself anymore. It was about making sure Liam finally faced the consequences he'd been running from his whole life, and I had just enough leverage to make sure he did. The fallout started faster than I expected. 3 days after that confrontation, I got a call from the dealership. The manager's voice was polite, almost cheerful. "Mr. Collins, I just wanted to thank you for the information you provided the other day about your brother's situation. We've had no luck reaching him for the past 2 weeks, and after his missed payment and the police report about reckless driving, we've decided to initiate repossession." I tried to keep my voice neutral. "Understood. I just wanted to make sure you knew where to find the car if you needed it." "Oh, we know," he said lightly. "The tow truck will be there by morning." That night, I didn't sleep much. Not out of fear this time, but because I kept imagining the look on Liam's face when he woke up to find that Challenger gone. The next morning, I heard the telltale sound of a tow truck's winch outside. I stepped onto the balcony just in time to see the car being hooked and pulled away. Liam wasn't there, thank God, but I could almost picture the storm that would hit when he found out. Sure enough, he showed up that afternoon, pounding on my door so hard I thought it might break. "You did this," he shouted. I didn't open the door. I just called through it, my voice calm. "You violated a legal order when you came here last time. If you don't leave right now, I'm calling the police again, and this time they'll take you in." There was a long silence on the other side of the door, then the sound of him kicking it once in frustration before storming off. That night, Maddie texted me, "He's staying with some guy from work now. He's broke. Everyone knows what happened." And just like that, the calls from my mom stopped too. I guess even she couldn't spin this one into just borrowing. Over the next week, everything started to settle. My lawyer filed the final paperwork, and we had a court date set for the following month to formally dissolve any joint accounts Liam and I had ever shared. It felt like closing a chapter that had been open way too long. But the real moment of closure came a week later on a quiet Saturday morning. I was making pancakes for Jake when there was a knock at the door. A soft one this time. When I opened it, Liam was standing there. No yelling, no smug grin, just standing with his hands shoved deep in his pockets, looking like someone deflated him. "I just came to say." He hesitated, glancing past me like he wasn't sure if I'd even let him get the words out. "I'm sorry." I leaned against the door frame, spatula still in my hand. "Sorry for taking the money or sorry you got caught?" His shoulders slumped. "Both." I let the silence stretch for a moment before I said, "Liam, you didn't just take money. You took away the one thing I promised Jake I'd never lose. Security. You scared him. You scared me. And you made me choose between being your brother and being his dad." He swallowed hard, but he didn't argue. "I'm not saying this to punish you," I went on. "I'm saying it because you need to hear it. You burned the bridge between us. And if you want to build it back someday, it's going to take a lot more than showing up here saying you're sorry." He nodded once, then turned and walked away without another word. When I closed the door, Jake peeked out from the kitchen. "Was that him?" "Yeah," I said, turning back to the stove. "He said he was sorry." Jake considered that, then asked, "Are we still safe?" I knelt down so we were eye level. "Safer than we've ever been," I said. And it was true. The pancakes that morning tasted better than any breakfast I could remember. Maybe because for the first time in years, I wasn't bracing for the next crisis. That afternoon, I took Jake to the park. The sun was out, kids were laughing, and for once I let myself laugh too. On the way back, Jake looked up at me and said, "You know, Dad, we make a pretty good team." I smiled. "Yeah, buddy, we really do." When we got home, I opened the folder one last time, looked at all the papers, and then tucked it into the back of the closet. Not because I needed it anymore, but because it was a reminder that I could be pushed to rock bottom and still climb back up. A reminder that I wasn't just someone who endured. I was someone who fought back. And as I stood there watching Jake sit on the floor building his Lego castle, I realized something. Liam might have taken my savings, but in the end, he'd given me something bigger. The clarity to finally stop being the one who always cleaned up his messes, the strength to put my son first, and the power to draw a line and say no more. For the first time in a long time, the future didn't scare me. Felt like ours again. Now on to the next story. Story 4. My name is Robert, and I turned 64 this spring. For most of my adult life, I worked as an operations manager at a mid-sized manufacturing company. It wasn't glamorous, but it was steady. I was the one who made sure things ran smoothly, who stayed late when shipments were delayed, who got the phone calls at 2 a.m. when a machine broke down. For 41 years, that building was as familiar to me as my own living room. I missed birthdays, vacations, and even a few holidays because I believed that providing for my family meant sacrifices, and I made them without a second thought. My wife, Margaret, used to tell me that one day I'd look back and regret not being more present, but I thought the payoff would be worth it. I thought they'd understand someday. The truth is, I always pictured retirement as something gentle, almost cinematic. I imagined sitting on the porch with Margaret, maybe traveling a little, watching my grandkids grow up. I thought there would be a celebration, but one filled with warmth, a recognition of the years I gave, the hours I traded for stability, and the countless times I put others before myself. What I didn't expect was the hollow joke of my own retirement party. It started as a company event, but my family insisted on joining in. "We'll make it extra special," my son Andrew had said. He's 34 now, sharp, ambitious, and always eager to be the center of attention. He inherited Margaret's quick wit, though somewhere along the way, it turned mean-spirited. My daughter, Claire, younger by 3 years, is quieter, more reserved. She and I used to have a close bond, but distance grew when she moved out west, chasing her own life. She still called, still tried in her own way, but it always felt like Andrew's shadow loomed larger at every family gathering. The night of the party, the conference room was packed. Balloons, streamers, and those cheap plastic congratulations banners covered the walls. Coworkers I trained decades ago clapped me on the back, congratulating me on making it to the finish line. There were speeches, some kind, some rushed. But the moment that seared itself into my memory came when they wheeled out the cake. It was a large sheet cake frosted in white with bright blue lettering piped across the top. And there it was, written for everyone to see. Finally useless. The words sank into me like a stone. The room erupted in laughter. A chorus of chuckles, claps, and even a few whistles filled the air. I tried to play along because what else could I do? My son was front and center, phone in hand, recording it all with a grin stretched across his face. "Dad, it's perfect," he shouted, as if mocking my life's work was some kind of clever punchline. Margaret laughed too, hesitant at first, but then joining in, swept up in the wave. I caught Claire's eyes for a split second. She wasn't laughing. She looked down at her plate, fiddling with her fork. I smiled for the photos. I posed, knife in hand, pretending to cut the cake like it was all one big joke. Inside, though, something shifted. It wasn't just the cake. It was the culmination of years of quiet dismissals, of sacrifices that went unseen, of being the steady background character in my own family story. After the speeches, I picked up the tab for the restaurant portion. Naturally, Andrew raised a toast, clinking his glass against his new Rolex, a purchase he hadn't stopped bragging about since the day he got it. "To Dad," he said, smirking. "May he enjoy being finally useless." Laughter roared again, and I swallowed it down with the bitter taste of my drink. When the night ended, they all filed out, patting me on the back, thanking me for dinner, promising to call soon. I drove home alone. Margaret had decided to ride with Andrew, saying she wanted to help him with something important. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a flood of photos being tagged on social media. Smiling faces, clinking glasses, me in the background holding that ridiculous cake. I sat in the driveway for a long time, staring at the dark windows of my house. 41 years, and this was the send-off. The words replayed in my head. Finally useless. I don't know if I've ever felt so hollow. That night, I didn't sleep. I walked through my office, the one room in the house that was truly mine. Files, old photos, certificates, notes from projects long finished. I realized I had been holding on to a version of myself no one else seemed to see anymore. By dawn, I had made a decision. I cleared out my desk at the company later that morning, quietly and without fanfare. I packed my personal belongings into 2 boxes, loaded them into the car, and drove off. Not a word to Margaret, not a call to Andrew, nothing to Claire. 3 weeks later, I heard from an old coworker that Margaret had posted online. If anyone knows where he is, please tell him we just want him back. But that's not where the story ends. It's only where it begins. When I left that night, I thought maybe it was just the sting of the moment. Maybe I was being too sensitive. Maybe I'd look back on it and laugh. But the thing about humiliation is that it doesn't fade. It festers. Every time I replayed the party in my mind, I noticed new details. The way Andrew leaned back in his chair, smirking like the joke was his crowning achievement. How Margaret had laughed harder once she realized everyone else was watching her reaction. The look on Claire's face when she glanced at me, then quickly away like she was embarrassed for me but too scared to say anything. In the days that followed, I tried to maintain some semblance of normal life. Margaret carried on like nothing had happened. She even made a few casual comments about how I had plenty of time now to run errands, fix things around the house, and help Andrew with his new venture. That last part stuck with me. Andrew's new venture. He'd been talking about it for months. Some startup idea involving property investments that, to me, sounded half-baked. But everyone around him treated it like the second coming of sliced bread. "Dad, you've got the experience," he said one evening when he stopped by. "All those years managing budgets, logistics. You could really help me get this thing off the ground. I mean, you don't have anything else going on now, right?" He said it with a grin, sipping from one of my beers like he owned the place. Margaret chimed in. "It would be good for you, Robert. You don't want to just sit around the house all day. This could give you purpose." Purpose? The word hit me harder than it should have. After 41 years of providing, raising kids, paying mortgages, and keeping this family afloat, they spoke as if I had been wandering aimlessly until Andrew came up with his big idea. I told them I needed time to think about it. Andrew just shrugged. "Well, don't take too long. Opportunities don't wait, old man." He laughed as if it were playful banter, but there was no mistaking the edge in his voice. The favoritism had always been there, subtle at first. When Andrew was younger, he was the golden child. His report cards, his sports trophies, his charm, everything he did was celebrated. When Claire got into college, I remember her showing Margaret her acceptance letter, beaming with pride. Margaret congratulated her, but then immediately turned to Andrew, asking about his plans for the weekend, dismissing Claire's news as if it were nothing. It wasn't that Claire wasn't loved, but she was always treated like a side character in Andrew's story. And now, as adults, the pattern was stronger than ever. Claire would call to check in, telling Margaret about her work, her travels, the people she'd met. Margaret would nod politely, but when Andrew walked into the room, the entire atmosphere shifted. Suddenly, she was all smiles, hanging on his every word. After the retirement party, Andrew began to treat me like his personal assistant. He'd call in the middle of the day, asking me to pick up supplies, look over his proposals, or even drive across town to meet one of his potential investors because I had the free time. Each time I said yes, I felt a piece of myself erode. I wasn't helping my son succeed. I was enabling his arrogance. One afternoon, Claire came over while Andrew was in the kitchen with Margaret. I was sitting in the living room, leafing through a folder of his so-called business plans. Claire sat beside me, her voice low. "Dad, you don't have to do this," she whispered. I looked at her, confused. "Do what?" "Run yourself ragged for him. He doesn't appreciate it. He never has." There was a sadness in her eyes, a quiet frustration that mirrored my own. Before I could respond, Andrew strutted into the room, clapping his hands together. "All right, team meeting time. Dad, you ready?" He tossed a stack of papers onto the table in front of me, barely glancing at Claire. "Sorry, sis. This might be a little over your head." Claire's face hardened, but she said nothing. She excused herself a few minutes later, muttering something about needing to leave. I watched her go, feeling torn. On one hand, she was right. I didn't have to do this. On the other hand, Margaret looked so proud every time Andrew asked for my help, as if his validation mattered more than my well-being. The weeks wore on, and the small slights turned sharper. Margaret began scheduling my days without asking. Doctor's appointments for her, grocery trips, favors for Andrew. When I pushed back, she'd frown and say, "Robert, you're retired. What else do you have to do?" One night, Andrew brought over a few of his friends for drinks. They were younger, loud, full of bravado. At some point, the conversation turned to me. "You're lucky, man," one of them said to Andrew. "Having a dad who can bankroll your startup and still run errands for you. That's like hitting the jackpot." The group laughed. Andrew didn't correct them. He just raised his glass and said, "Yeah, Dad's finally useful for something." I felt the blood rush to my face, but I said nothing. Margaret sat beside me, sipping her wine as if the comment had never been made. That night, as I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the bitterness deepened. I had become a joke to them. Not a father, not a husband, not a man who had given his life to provide. Just a tool to be used until I had nothing left to give. And yet, the worst was still to come. It happened on a Tuesday, the kind of ordinary weekday that should have passed without a second thought. But I'll never forget it because that was the day the ground gave way beneath me. I had been working through another one of Andrew's urgent requests. He'd asked me to review a contract he was planning to sign with a group of investors. To me, the numbers didn't make sense. The terms seemed predatory, and I told him as much. He brushed it off, laughing. "Dad, you're stuck in the old way of thinking. This is how real money gets made now." Still, he insisted I look it over, so I spent hours at the kitchen table highlighting clauses and jotting down notes. Margaret came in halfway through, setting a cup of coffee down beside me. "You worry too much," she said. "Andrew knows what he's doing. Just support him." But I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. That afternoon, I decided to stop by the bank. I had always been cautious with finances, and I thought maybe if I spoke to someone I could get a clearer picture. When I arrived, the clerk pulled up my account information and my stomach dropped. There were withdrawals I didn't recognize, large ones spaced out over the last several weeks. $10,000 here, $15,000 there, another $20,000 not long after the retirement party. My balance, which should have been more than enough to cover the next few years comfortably, was dangerously low. I asked the clerk for more details, and that's when the betrayal hit me square in the chest. The withdrawals weren't random. They were transfers authorized under my name, but the recipient was unmistakable. Andrew. I felt the room tilt. My own son had been siphoning money from my account. I asked how that was even possible, and the clerk explained that Margaret had co-signed some of the transactions. She must have known. She had to have known. I stood there dumbfounded, clutching the printout of my own disappearing life savings. That evening, I confronted Margaret. She was standing at the stove, stirring a pot of soup as if nothing was wrong. "Margaret," I said, holding up the papers, my voice shaking. "What is this? How long has Andrew been taking money out of my account?" She didn't even flinch. She sighed, set the spoon down, and turned to face me with that same patient look she used to give the kids when they were being difficult. "Robert, it's not what you think. He's borrowing it for the business. You'll get it back once he's successful." "Borrowing?" My voice cracked. "This is our retirement. 41 years, Margaret. That money was for us, for our future. You let him drain it without even telling me." Her eyes hardened. "You're overreacting. Andrew has potential. He's building something. And if you can't see that, maybe you're the one holding him back." The words cut deeper than I thought possible. Holding him back, as if my entire life's work was nothing more than an obstacle to Andrew's ambition. Later that night, Andrew showed up, breezing through the front door like he owned the place. He didn't even wait for me to speak. "Dad, I know you saw the transfers. Relax. It's an investment. You should be thanking me. You're finally putting your money to good use instead of just letting it rot in the bank." I stared at him, my hands trembling. "You stole from me." He laughed. Actually laughed. "Stole? Come on, families share. You've been sitting on that money forever doing nothing. I'm just moving it to where it'll actually grow. Don't worry. You'll get your cut when this thing blows up. Something inside me cracked. Then I looked at my son, not as the boy I raised, not as the man I hoped he'd become, but as a stranger who saw me as nothing more than a wallet with legs. And my wife, the woman who had once stood beside me through hard times, was standing in the doorway, arms crossed, siding with him. I realized in that moment that I wasn't just disrespected. I was betrayed in the most intimate and deliberate way possible. The soup on the stove burned. The house smelled of smoke. And all I could think was, this was no longer my home. But that was only the beginning. After that night, the air in the house grew colder, heavier. It wasn't just the silence between us. It was the way Margaret and Andrew carried on as if nothing was wrong, as if I had simply imagined the betrayal. Andrew still came over almost daily, dropping his coat on the couch, raiding the fridge and spreading out his contracts on my dining table. Margaret cooked for him, praised him, and nodded along to his stories about big deals on the horizon. Every now and then, she'd toss me a look, almost daring me to bring it up again. I didn't. Inside, though, I was unraveling. For the first time in my adult life, I felt powerless. Money had always been my safeguard, my proof that all the sacrifices were worth it. Now, every time I looked at the printout from the bank, I saw years of overtime shifts, missed vacations, and sleepless nights evaporating into Andrew's fantasy. It wasn't just the money. It was the realization that I had no allies in my own home. The woman I married had chosen our son's ambition over our security. My son had chosen greed over respect. Sleep became impossible. I'd lie awake in the dark, listening to Margaret's steady breathing beside me, and wonder if she even felt a shred of guilt. In the mornings, I sat in my office, staring at the walls lined with certificates and photos, proof of a life that now felt meaningless. The faces in the photos looked younger, happier, unaware of what was to come. I tried to call Claire. She picked up on the second ring, her voice soft but tired. She lived 3 states away, and I hadn't told her the full story yet. "Dad, are you all right?" she asked. I hesitated. Part of me wanted to spill everything, to tell her how betrayed I felt, how Andrew was bleeding me dry, but I couldn't bring myself to burden her. "I'm fine," I lied. "Just wondering how you're doing." We talked about her job, her apartment, the small joys of her daily life. When I hung up, I sat there staring at the phone, the ache in my chest heavier than before. She was the one person who might have understood, and I couldn't even tell her. Meanwhile, Andrew's demands grew bolder. One afternoon, he dropped by with a folder in hand and a smug grin. "Dad, I need you to co-sign this," he said, sliding the papers across the table. "It's just a short-term loan. Low risk. You'll barely notice." I opened the folder and felt my stomach twist. It was a loan for nearly $50,000. My name was already typed on the line, waiting for my signature. "I'm not signing this," I said quietly. Andrew's smile faltered. "Dad, come on. This is how business works. You've got to take risks." "Not with my future," I replied, closing the folder. He stared at me, the grin gone now, replaced by something sharper. "You've already invested. Don't back out now." Margaret, who had been hovering nearby, spoke up. "Robert, don't be stubborn. This is for all of us. For the family." "For the family," I snapped. "Or just for him?" The tension hung in the air. Andrew's jaw tightened. Margaret shook her head like I was being unreasonable. And for the first time, I didn't argue further. I simply got up, walked into my office, and shut the door. That became my habit. Silence instead of confrontation. I stopped eating dinner with them. When Andrew came over, I stopped answering his calls. When Margaret tried to rope me into his errands, I made excuses. On the surface, it looked like I was withdrawing, fading into the background. But beneath the quiet, I was taking notes. I gathered bank statements, copies of transfers, and contracts Andrew had left behind. I created a folder hidden deep in my filing cabinet where Margaret would never think to look. Each document was proof, not just of the theft, but of the disrespect that had hollowed out my life. At night, when the house was still, I opened the folder and studied the pages under the soft glow of my desk lamp. My pulse would quicken, my mind racing. This wasn't just planning. It was survival. But the weight of it all pressed down on me. The house felt foreign, like I was squatting in someone else's home. Meals with Margaret were strained. Our conversations clipped. Sometimes I'd catch her scrolling through her phone, smiling at Andrew's posts online, photos of him at fancy restaurants, boasting about new deals in the works, all funded with the money he stole. I was living in my own shadow, stripped of dignity, trapped in a home where I no longer belonged. And yet, as much as it hurt, the silence gave me something I hadn't had before: clarity. I knew I couldn't stay in this place forever. I knew I couldn't keep playing the fool. Something had to change. And deep down, I had already begun to imagine how. The first real shift came quietly, almost unnoticeable at first. I stopped waiting for Margaret or Andrew to acknowledge me. I stopped trying to win back respect in a house where it no longer existed. Instead, I turned inward. At dawn, when Margaret was still asleep, I'd slip out of the house and drive. Sometimes to the library, sometimes to the park, sometimes just to nowhere in particular. At first, I thought I was simply running away from the heaviness of the house. But slowly, those hours became mine again. I started reading books on finance, on business, on psychology. I hadn't studied like that since I was in my 20s. And each page pulled me further out of the fog. I realized something Andrew would never admit. Experience mattered. I had 41 years of it. By chance, I ran into an old colleague, Martin, at the library. He'd retired a few years before me, but unlike me, he hadn't disappeared into the background. He'd been consulting for smaller companies part-time, helping them streamline operations. "Pays well enough to keep life interesting," he said with a grin. That night, I thought about our conversation for hours. Consulting. It wasn't something I had ever considered. I thought retirement was the end of usefulness. But what if it wasn't? I pulled out my laptop, the same one Andrew always mocked for being outdated, and started drafting a profile on a professional network. I listed my years of experience, the projects I'd overseen, the crises I'd managed. Felt strange, almost arrogant, to put it all into words. But when I hit publish, a small surge of pride filled me. Within a week, I had my first inquiry. A regional logistics firm wanted advice on restructuring their supply chain. It was small scale, but the moment I sat across the table from their managers laying out solutions, I felt alive again. They listened, actually listened, like my words had value. They paid me for my time, too, more than Andrew ever promised in his so-called venture. That first check wasn't about the money. It was about proof. Proof that I wasn't finally useless. I didn't tell Margaret, not at first. I didn't tell Andrew either. When they asked where I was going in the mornings, I just said I was keeping busy. They didn't press. Margaret was too absorbed in Andrew's world, and Andrew assumed I was sulking. But quietly, I built momentum. Word spread. One client led to another, and soon I was balancing multiple consulting gigs. My calendar filled up. My bank account, once bled dry, began to recover. Not dramatically, not overnight, but steadily. Each deposit was another brick in the wall I was rebuilding around myself. With the work came something I hadn't felt in years: confidence. My back straightened. My voice grew firmer. I no longer hovered around the house waiting for scraps of respect. I had purpose again, but this time it wasn't for Margaret or Andrew. It was for me. Claire noticed first. One afternoon I called her just to catch up. She said, "You sound different, Dad. Happier. Stronger." I smiled into the phone. Maybe I am. Meanwhile, Andrew was spiraling in the opposite direction. His venture wasn't taking off the way he bragged online. The flashy posts of dinners and parties grew less frequent, replaced by vague quotes about hustling and trusting the process. I knew what that meant. Money was drying up. He still had Margaret's blind loyalty, but cracks were showing. Sometimes I'd overhear her on the phone with him, her voice sharp, asking when he'd pay back what he borrowed. I stayed quiet, listening, filing it away. One evening, Andrew barged into the house, pacing like a storm. "Dad, I need more." The investors are pulling out unless I can cover the shortfall. This is make or break time. I looked at him calmly, something I couldn't have done months earlier. I don't have anything for you. His jaw clenched. Don't play games. You've got accounts, assets. You can unlock something. I said no. My voice was steady, cold. Margaret rushed to his side, glaring at me. Robert, stop being selfish. This is your son, your blood. Don't you want him to succeed? I didn't answer. I just turned and walked into my office, leaving them standing in the kitchen. For the first time, it didn't feel like a retreat. Felt like control. Inside, I opened my hidden folder, now much thicker than before. Bank statements, contracts, proof of unauthorized transfers. Everything I'd need if the time came to expose them. My consulting work had sharpened me, reminded me of the precision required in documentation. Each page was a weapon waiting for its moment. And as I slid the latest document into place, I realized something important. I wasn't at rock bottom anymore. I was climbing quietly, steadily, out of the pit they had shoved me into. They thought I was fading. They thought I was beaten. They had no idea what was coming. It was almost poetic how the opportunity came to me, not through force or confrontation, but through the natural cracks forming in Andrew's empire of ego. By early autumn, my consulting work had blossomed. I had 3 steady clients and a handful of smaller ones. The money wasn't astronomical, but it was consistent, clean, and mine. Every invoice I sent, every payment I received, felt like a stitch mending the wound they had torn open. I started a new account, one Margaret didn't know about. Quiet deposits, a growing balance, untouchable. One morning, I got a call from Martin, the colleague who had nudged me into consulting. Robert, he said, there's a company downstate looking for a short-term interim director. Supply chain mess, leadership vacuum, the works. I told them about you. Interested. I almost laughed. Me back in a director's seat after retirement. But the more he explained, the more sense it made. It was temporary, high-paying, and most importantly, powerful. A chance to step into a role where my experience wasn't just valued. It was needed. I accepted. Within 2 weeks, I was commuting twice a week, staying in a modest hotel paid for by the company, and running operations like I had never left. The staff respected me. The executives trusted me. And for the first time in years, I felt like myself again. Not the finally useless man from the cake, but Robert, the fixer, the man people turned to when things mattered. Margaret noticed my absence. Of course she'd ask, "Where are you going all the time?" I'd smile and say, "Keeping busy." She didn't press. She was too focused on Andrew, who by now was drowning in his own failures. The signs were everywhere. His investors stopped showing up. His phone calls grew frantic, his voice sharper. I overheard one conversation where he barked at Margaret. "I just need another bridge loan. Dad's got to sign it." "He will. He always does." But this time I didn't. Then came the night I overheard the truth that set the stage for everything. Andrew was in the kitchen with Margaret, his voice low but urgent. I was in my office, door cracked just enough. "Mom, if Dad doesn't give me access, I'm sunk," he hissed. "The investors are threatening to sue. I've been moving money around to cover, but it's not enough. If anyone finds out, I'm done." My chest tightened. Moving money around. Investors threatening to sue. He wasn't just reckless, he was in deep, legally. Margaret whispered back, "I'll talk to him. He's being difficult, but he'll listen to me eventually. He always does." I closed my eyes, letting the words settle. For decades, I had been the one they leaned on, the one who fixed everything, the one who sacrificed. But now they weren't leaning on me. They were trying to use me as a shield for Andrew's collapse. And that's when the plan began to crystallize. The folder in my office wasn't just evidence anymore. It was leverage. I had bank statements showing unauthorized transfers, contracts with my forged signature, proof that Margaret had co-signed withdrawals behind my back. Combined with Andrew's mounting legal troubles, it was enough to burn their house of cards to the ground. At the same time, my position at the company gave me new connections. Lawyers, financial experts, people who understood how to navigate messy situations with precision. I didn't announce my intentions. I didn't rant or rave. I just started asking quiet questions, learning what would happen if evidence of financial misconduct came to light. The answers were clear. Andrew could be ruined. Margaret too, if tied to his schemes. But I wasn't reckless. Revenge wasn't about striking blindly. It was about patience, about letting them dig their own grave. While I built my escape, I began moving more of my assets into the new account carefully, discreetly. I arranged for my consulting payments to flow there directly. I spoke to a lawyer about updating my will and revising account access. No more automatic rights for Margaret. No way for Andrew to reach in. Meanwhile, I played the part of the tired, retired man. Around them, I was quiet, withdrawn, even pliant. Margaret took my silence as submission. Andrew saw it as weakness. They didn't realize I was buying time. Then came the moment that sealed it. Claire called one evening, her voice soft but insistent. "Dad, I don't know what's going on, but I feel like you're hiding something. Are you all right?" For the first time, I didn't lie. I didn't tell her everything, but I said enough. "I'm finding my footing again, sweetheart. And when the time comes, I'll need you to trust me." There was a pause. Then she said, "I always have." It was the lifeline I needed. I wasn't alone anymore. Not truly. And as I hung up the phone, I realized the pieces were finally in place. Andrew was cornered. Margaret was blind. And I was holding all the cards. They thought I was powerless. But in truth, I was standing at the threshold of something far greater. The chance to strike came faster than I expected. Andrew's world was crumbling, and desperation makes people reckless. It was a gray Thursday afternoon when he showed up at the house unannounced. He didn't knock, he never did anymore. He stormed straight into the living room, papers in hand, sweat beading on his forehead. Margaret trailed behind him, wringing her hands like a nervous accomplice. "Dad, this is it?" Andrew said, slapping the papers down on the coffee table. "Final chance. If you don't sign this, everything collapses. The investors will sue. The whole venture goes down. We'll all be ruined." I looked at the papers calmly, my heart steady. It was another loan application, bigger this time, over $100,000. My name was pre-filled, my supposed consent implied. But what caught my eye wasn't the number. It was the fact that he had already forged my signature on one of the drafts. Sloppy, desperate, arrogant. "I'm not signing this," I said quietly. Andrew's face reddened. "Don't play games. This is for the family. For you, for Mom, for the future." Margaret's voice trembled as she chimed in. "Robert, please. He's right. If this fails, we lose everything. Think of the house, the reputation." I cut her off, my tone sharp but calm. "You already lost everything the moment you started stealing from me." The room froze. Andrew blinked. Margaret's mouth opened and closed like she couldn't find the words. I reached into the drawer of the side table and pulled out the folder I had been building for months. Neatly stacked, tabbed, and organized. Bank statements, transfer receipts, forged contracts. All laid out like an indictment. I set it on the table between us. "Do you see this?" I said, my voice steady. "Every dollar you took, every document you forged, every withdrawal Margaret co-signed. I kept it all. Copies notarized. Lawyers have seen it. If I file this, Andrew, your investors won't just sue you, they'll bury you. And Margaret, you'll go down with him." Margaret gasped, her face draining of color. Andrew's bravado faltered. He reached for the papers, but I placed my hand firmly on top. "No," I said. "You don't get to touch this." He stammered. "Dad, you wouldn't." "You can't." I leaned forward, locking eyes with him. "I would and I can. But here's the difference between us. Andrew, I don't need to scream or brag to prove my power. I've already taken it back." For the first time, he looked small. The swagger melted away, replaced by the raw panic of a man who realized the safety net was gone. "I'll make it right," he muttered. "Just give me time." "You had time," I replied, "and you wasted it." Then, turning to Margaret, I said, "You stood by him. You signed off on my future without a second thought. And you laughed at me when he called me useless. I let the words hang in the air. So here's what's going to happen. I'm done funding his failures. I'm done being mocked in my own home. From this moment forward, my accounts are locked, my assets moved, and neither of you will see a cent without going through me. Andrew's jaw tightened, fury flashing in his eyes. You can't just cut us off. I smiled faintly. Watch me. I stood, gathered the folder, and walked toward my office. Behind me, I could hear Margaret trying to calm him, her voice breaking, his voice rising in anger. But I didn't turn back. In my office, I locked the folder away, not because I needed it right then, but because its very existence gave me control. Every shred of evidence was a leash around their necks, and they knew it. The days that followed were a storm. Andrew called, texted, and even showed up at my office demanding another chance, swearing he'd turn things around. Margaret pleaded with me at night, insisting I was being too harsh, that family should stick together. But I didn't bend. Instead, I kept working, kept building. My consulting business thrived, my savings grew, and the more they flailed, the stronger I felt. Revenge wasn't loud or flashy. It was quiet, deliberate, and devastating. By stripping away their access, I forced them to face the consequences of their own arrogance. And though they didn't know it yet, this was only the beginning of their unraveling. The fallout came like a slow-moving storm. At first a drizzle, then a downpour, then the kind of thunder that shakes a house to its foundations. The first crack came when Andrew's investors finally snapped. With no fresh cash flowing in from me, his juggling act collapsed. One morning, I received an email from a lawyer representing one of those investors. They had come across my name on the forged documents and they wanted clarification. I replied with 2 lines. I did not sign these papers. Attached are notarized copies of my original documents proving unauthorized transfers. That was enough. Within weeks, Andrew was drowning in legal notices. His venture, once paraded online as the next big success story, became a cautionary tale whispered about in hushed tones. Lawsuits piled up. His so-called friends stopped answering his calls. The social media feeds that once displayed dinners, Rolexes, and champagne dried up completely. Margaret tried to shield him at first. She met with lawyers, sold her jewelry, and even whispered about taking out a second mortgage. But when she discovered that I had already moved my share of the house into a trust with Claire as beneficiary, the realization hit her. She couldn't drag me down with them. For once, she had to face the wreckage she had enabled. The fights grew louder. I heard them through closed doors. Margaret begging, Andrew snapping, both of them pointing fingers, and I stayed silent, calm, the man they thought was powerless, now watching them unravel under the weight of their own choices. One evening, after yet another shouting match in the kitchen, Andrew stormed out, tires screeching down the street. Margaret stood in the doorway, her shoulders slumped, her face pale. When she turned to me, her eyes were filled with something I hadn't seen in years. Not anger, not mockery, but fear. "Robert," she whispered, "what have we done?" I didn't answer. Claire flew in a week later. When she stepped into the house, she hugged me tight. No questions asked. She had known somehow that I was waiting for her, that everything I had built these last months was for a future where respect still existed. Together, we began the process of untangling what was left. Lawyers, banks, accounts, all sorted with meticulous care. Andrew eventually declared bankruptcy. Margaret moved in with her sister, claiming she needed space to think. I let her go. For the first time in decades, I felt no obligation to chase after her, no weight pressing me to fix what they had broken. And me? I kept working, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. My consulting business flourished, my new account grew, and for the first time, I wasn't living for anyone else's approval. Months later, I sat on the porch of a modest cabin I had rented by the lake. Claire was visiting for the weekend, sipping coffee beside me. The air was crisp, the water still. She looked at me and said softly, "You don't look useless to me, Dad. You look free." I smiled, the words settling into me like balm. "Finally free," I echoed. That was the real ending. Not the cake, not the party, not the betrayal. It was the moment I realized that revenge wasn't about destruction. It was about reclaiming the life they tried to steal from me and walking away while they crumbled under the weight of their own choices. And I did walk away. For good. Now on to the next story. Story 5. My dad sent, "We've decided to cut ties. Don't show up anywhere ever." My sister hearted the message. I replied, "I'll pull my name from all loans tomorrow." By midnight, the chat was full of shouting in all caps. I was sitting on my lunch break at work, half scrolling through emails when the text came in. It was from my dad. The screen lit up with a single message. "We've decided to cut ties. Don't show up anywhere ever." 5 minutes later, my sister hearted the message. No context, no warning, just a sentence that ended decades of family ties like it was a group chat RSVP. I remember staring at the screen, not even surprised anymore. Fists tired, I replied without emotion, "I'll pull my name from all loans tomorrow." And that's when the fuse hit the dynamite. By midnight, the family group chat was flooded with notifications. All caps, half sentences, blame ping-ponging between my parents like it was some twisted team sport. My mom was shouting virtually about how I was abandoning them. My dad kept writing that I was being manipulative and cruel. And my sister, who'd always liked the drama, started baiting me with half-truths and twisted memories. Like this was high school and she was queen of the cafeteria again. But none of them mentioned the actual problem. None of them brought up the part where, for the last 4 years, I've been quietly carrying their financial debt weight. The family business loan that my dad defaulted on once already under my name. The second car, the one my mom said she needed just until her credit improved. The utilities and house repairs they couldn't afford because they were investing in the future. Me again. And somehow that was just expected, that I'd keep shouldering all of it while they took turns criticizing my career, my boyfriend, and the way I lived my life. I became their backup plan. They didn't even have the decency to thank me until suddenly I wasn't useful anymore. Or maybe I just stopped being quiet and they decided I was the problem. So, they cut me off thinking I'd come crawling back. Apologize. Beg. Resume paying. They said I made it real. The next morning I emailed the bank. I told them I was initiating the process to remove myself as cosigner on all open loans. I emailed the insurance company to cancel the policy on the car they were still driving under my name. I called the credit union and scheduled a meeting for Friday to transfer full ownership of the debt. They didn't see it coming. And when they did, it hit hard. That night, the tone shifted. My dad texted, not yelling this time, "This has gone too far. You don't understand what this does to us." Then my mom, "We were just upset. You're our daughter. You can't just abandon your family like this." And then finally, my sister, "They can't get new financing without your credit. Are you seriously going to screw us over for no reason?" There was no reason. I gave them years. I gave them financial safety nets and bailed them out of problem after problem. I let them shame me, blame me, dismiss me, and I still stayed. And the moment I asked for some basic respect, they made it clear I was only as valuable as my FICO score. This wasn't about family. This was about access. Access to my money, my name, my silence. But the locks were changed. I wasn't going to be the family scapegoat and ATM anymore. They made the first move. I just finished what they started. Tomorrow, I'd finish the paperwork with the bank, and after that, they could figure out their mess without me. They chose to cut ties, so I lit the bridge behind me. The next morning, I walked into the bank like I'd rehearsed it in my head. I didn't flinch when the loan officer raised his eyebrows at the list of accounts I wanted my name removed from. I'd brought every document, every signature line highlighted. I'd spent the night before gathering everything while my phone vibrated off the table with new messages. My mom tried guilt. My dad tried logic. My sister, predictably, tried mockery. But I'd stopped reading. It felt surreal sitting there in that office, passing over forms that on paper made it all final. These weren't just loans or co-signatures. These were lifelines I'd handed over while they pretended I didn't exist unless they needed something. They depended on me to keep the lights on. Literally. They just never thought I'd walk away. When I left the bank, I turned my phone back on. There were voicemails, 9 of them. My mom was sobbing in one. My dad was fuming in another. My sister said she hoped my boyfriend dumped me and I ended up in debt. That one made me laugh because she was basically describing their own lives. I ignored them and drove straight to the storage unit I'd been secretly renting for a few weeks. That was the part they didn't know. I'd seen this coming. The last big fight we had, when my dad yelled at me for not coming home for Thanksgiving because I had to work overtime, that's when something clicked. I started slowly moving my personal things out of their house where I still technically lived at the time, even though I hadn't spent a full weekend there in almost 6 months. And now all my things were safe off their property. Nothing for them to threaten or hold hostage. That night, I got another message from my dad. "You've made your point. Enough is enough. Come to the house so we can fix this like adults." Right? Like adults who send one-sentence text exiles and have meltdowns when their golden goose stops laying credit-based eggs. Then came the bomb. "If you don't fix this, we could lose the house." That was the moment I realized just how deep the hole was. They hadn't just used me. They had built everything, on the assumption that I'd always say yes, that I'd always be there no matter how badly they treated me. It wasn't just bad parenting. It was a plan. And now that it was falling apart, they were scrambling like rats on a sinking ship. So I replied once, "You cut me off. I'm just giving you what you asked for." That was the last message I sent them that week. I spent the weekend at my boyfriend's place. He didn't say much, which I appreciated. We just made pasta, watched dumb movies, and let the silence be safe. He didn't ask questions. He didn't poke around for gossip. He just made space for me to breathe. And for once, I felt like I could. By Sunday, the tone had shifted again. They weren't angry anymore. They were desperate, and I could feel it. The storm wasn't over. It was just starting to turn back in my direction. But this time, I wasn't going to bend. Monday started too quietly. No texts, no missed calls, no passive-aggressive "hope you're okay" emails. After 3 days of being harassed, shamed, and emotionally waterboarded through every possible communication channel, I should have felt relieved. Instead, I felt it in my stomach, like the air before a storm. That silence wasn't peace. It was strategy. I was mid-coffee refill at work when my manager flagged me down. Said someone was asking for me up front. A woman wouldn't give her name. I asked what she looked like, already knowing the answer. He said she was in her 50s, nice coat, seemed polite but intense. I walked to the front and there she was. My mom, sitting in the waiting area like it was a school pickup. She stood too fast and started talking immediately, like she was afraid I might walk away. Told me she forgave me, said they had talked it through and decided I'd had my little moment. And now it was time to come home and clean up this mess. I didn't say anything, just turned to leave. She followed. Then she pulled out a folder. Inside were photocopies of every financial document I'd touched in the last 4 years. Cosign loans, business papers, my old credit card statements, even my tax return from last year. She said they'd spoken to a lawyer. Said the lawyer told them I might be legally obligated to continue paying certain things unless I went through the right process. Said there were loopholes. Said they could make things very difficult if I didn't cooperate. I didn't even ask how she got those papers. I walked straight past her and back to my desk like she wasn't there. My manager gave me a look but didn't say anything. I logged in, pulled up my bank accounts and started changing passwords. But it got worse. That night, I stayed at my boyfriend's place again. He lived in a quiet complex just outside the city, nowhere near my family. No way they knew the address, or so I thought. At 7:30 the next morning, there was a knock at the door. It was my sister, hair curled, makeup done, wearing a fake smile. The face she reserved for when she was trying to manipulate someone into doing something they'd regret. My boyfriend answered. She asked to speak to me alone. I said no. So, she stood there in the doorway and started talking like we were at brunch. She said I was being immature, that I didn't understand how much pressure mom and dad were under, that collectors had started calling the house, that the business credit card was frozen, that they couldn't even get groceries because the joint account I shut down was essential. She said she was willing to let bygones be bygones if I would just call the bank and co-sign one more time, just for a bridge loan, just to get them through the month. I asked her how she found me. She said it was easy. I had tagged my boyfriend in a photo once. She just went through his friends list, followed the breadcrumbs, and found the building. That's when I realized I'd underestimated them again. They weren't just being desperate. They were being deliberate. She said, "You think he's going to stick around when he sees what a mess you left behind?" That did it. I told her to leave. She tried to keep talking. I shut the door in her face. Then I opened my laptop and nuked the last few links they had to me. I closed the joint credit line completely. I had only left it open with a zero balance out of pity. I froze the shared business profile with the accountant. I even forgave the outstanding balance on a small personal loan I'd made to them last year just so they could never use it as an excuse to contact me again. They had nothing left to threaten me with. No leverage. No hooks. That night, I told my boyfriend everything. The years of debt, the manipulation, the way they had shaped their entire lives around draining me like a resource instead of raising me like a daughter. He listened, then said he was proud of me, not for standing up to them but for finally choosing myself. The next day, I got an email from their lawyer. Not a real threat, just enough legalese to sound scary. But the bank had already confirmed. My name was gone. My accounts were protected. There was nothing they could do. So, I wrote back one sentence. There will be no further contact. No emotion, no explanation, just a boundary. They thought I wouldn't survive without them. They had no idea I'd been doing it on my own the whole time. Now, I was going to start living for real, and I wanted them to see it. A week passed with no contact, then another. It should have felt like peace, like finally reaching the shore after years of swimming upstream. But it didn't. Not completely. The silence was too precise, too calculated, like they weren't done. They were just regrouping behind the curtain. And then it started again. Not from them directly, of course. That would have been too obvious. The first message came from a cousin I hadn't spoken to in years. She said she'd heard from my mom that I'd had a mental breakdown and left the family suddenly, that they were deeply worried and just wanted me to come home. She ended it with, "They're saying you're not well. Is there someone you can talk to?" That one made me laugh out loud. Out of all the ways they could have twisted the story, they'd gone with the unstable daughter angle. 2 days later, a woman from the church I grew up in messaged me out of nowhere. Said she ran into my dad at a grocery store and he looked thin and sad. Said he told her I'd blocked them and cut off all contact and that it was breaking their hearts. She ended with, "Whatever happened, maybe just call. They're your parents." I didn't reply to either of them, but I started noticing something else. The longer I stayed gone, the better I started to feel. For the first time in years, I could actually see my paycheck last through the month. No more random requests for emergency bills or quick transfers. No sudden drains from joint accounts or suspicious activity on shared cards. No calls about late payments I never knew I was responsible for. For the first time in a long time, I was breathing. I moved in with my boyfriend full-time. It was the easiest decision I'd made in months. No drama, no financial games. We split rent, cooked together, handled bills like adults. He didn't flinch when I told him everything. He just listened and didn't try to fix it. He just stayed. That's when I realized what love actually looks like and what manipulation doesn't. Then came the Zillow link. A coworker of his sent it. Said, "Didn't your girlfriend's family live here?" My boyfriend opened it next to me. It was their house. Listed for sale. Cash offers only. Marked as pre-foreclosure. No mention of the custom renovations or the expensive appliances I'd paid for. Just a stripped-down shell. I hadn't done anything to force that. I hadn't sent a single letter. I just stepped away and the whole thing collapsed without me. The next day, I got an email from my mom. Not a text, not a call. An email clearly drafted, probably rewritten 10 times. It started soft. "We miss you. Things haven't been the same without you." By paragraph 3, the guilt kicked in. "We know we made mistakes, but we never thought you'd actually abandon your family." Then came the real reason. "Your dad's health is getting worse. We're behind on payments. The house is going. We don't have anywhere else to turn." And finally, the plea. "I know you said you're done, but you've always had a big heart. You've always taken care of us. Maybe you can reconsider. Just this once." There it was. They weren't reaching out because they changed. They were reaching out because I had stopped playing the role they wrote for me. Not daughter, not family, provider. I didn't reply. Instead, I logged into my account and made a $200 donation to a domestic violence shelter. I wasn't trying to be poetic. I just needed to send the money somewhere that actually helped people escape from the things that trapped them. A few days later, I drove by their house. It was empty. No cars, lights off. A for sale by owner sign sagging in the front yard. It should have felt satisfying, but it didn't. It just confirmed everything I already knew. They never saw me as a person. I was their plan B, their credit score safety net, they're always their fallback. Now, they were going to have to learn how to survive without me because I wasn't coming back. Not now, not ever. I really believed it was over. The house was gone. Every account they had access to was locked, closed, or stripped of my name. I'd blocked them on everything, from my phone to email to even LinkedIn. I'd even started therapy, finally giving myself permission to talk about things I used to pretend weren't real. For the first time in years, I wasn't looking over my shoulder, until I opened my door and they were standing there. It was a Sunday afternoon. My boyfriend and I had just gotten back from a quick weekend trip. A little escape up the coast. No itinerary, no drama. We were unpacking groceries when I saw the car parked across the street like a surveillance van. My dad's old black sedan, the one I'd helped him fix the alternator on last year, when he said he couldn't afford a mechanic. I froze. They were just sitting there, engine off, windows up, watching. I didn't go out there. I didn't wave. I walked back inside and sat down like a weight had just dropped back onto my chest. 15 minutes later, a knock. I didn't answer. So, they knocked again and again until finally I opened the door. They were holding a cardboard box. Inside were old pictures of me, drawings I made in kindergarten, birthday cards I'd forgotten existed, a few random trinkets from my childhood room. My mom held the box like it was a peace offering. My dad stood behind her, his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. She said they were downsizing, said the house was gone and they were starting fresh. She said they didn't come to argue, they just wanted to talk. My dad added that they missed their daughter. They said I'd always been the glue, said they were lost without me. I didn't speak. I just stared at the box. Then my mom said they were sorry, but not in a way that meant anything. She didn't say she was sorry for using me, for signing my name on papers without asking, for calling me selfish when I couldn't cover a loan payment, for treating my financial support like an obligation. She didn't apologize for the years of quiet guilt or the way my sister always got away with everything while I was expected to fix it all. She said she was sorry for how things ended, not for what caused the ending. They weren't here to own anything. They were here because they were scared, alone, broke, and still somehow believed that I could be guilt-tripped back into saving them. I asked them where they were moving. They said they weren't sure yet. Said they'd applied for a few rentals but had been denied. Credit too low, income too unstable. Then my dad said it straight. We need your help, just until we get on our feet. That word. Just. One more cosign. Just one more card. Just one more signature. Just enough to pull me back in. I told them no. Calmly, finally, I said I didn't want money from them, didn't expect anything, and wouldn't be chasing what they still owed me. They could keep the couch, the fridge, the washer I paid for. Keep the furniture I bought when their business was about to turn a corner. Keep it all. I didn't want it because it wasn't about the money anymore. It was about the silence, the freedom of no longer being tethered to people who only remembered you when the bills came due. My mom asked if I hated them. I said I didn't. I told her, hate takes energy, and I was finally using mine for myself. They stood there for another awkward minute like they couldn't believe it wasn't working. Then my mom placed the box on the ground and walked away. My dad followed without a word. I left the box outside for 2 days. Eventually, I threw it away, not because I didn't care about the memories, but because I no longer needed the proof that I'd been there. Later that night, I sat next to my boyfriend on the couch. We didn't even talk about it much. He just reached for my hand, and I realized, this is what stability feels like. No manipulation, no sudden requests, no double meanings, just peace. Let them watch my life from the outside now. Let them see what it looks like when I'm no longer the glue holding broken people together. I wasn't their solution anymore. I was finally becoming my own. I never heard from them again. Not in a way that mattered. A few months passed and the silence became normal. I stopped checking the old email accounts. I stopped expecting blocked numbers to be from them. I stopped replaying old conversations in my head. It was like I had left a country I once lived in and suddenly realized I never wanted to go back. But still, every now and then, a message would reach me. Not from them, never directly, but from the cracks in the social circle they used to haunt. A distant cousin messaged me out of nowhere asking if I could talk to my parents because they were having a hard time. An old family friend tagged me in a Facebook comment about grace and forgiveness, clearly fishing for a response. I never gave them one. Then I started hearing the details. They moved out of the house before the bank could repossess it. My dad picked up part-time work doing deliveries. My mom started babysitting for cash under the table. My sister, who once said I was too uptight to live a real life, was living back in their cramped apartment, unemployed, blaming everyone but herself. Someone told me they tried to start a new business. It failed within 2 months. No credit, no backing, no one left to fool. Me? I was unrecognizable from the person they knew. I'd finally paid off my last bit of debt, the one I'd quietly carried from my early 20s because they promised they'd help, then pretended not to remember. Gone. I got promoted again. A real title, a corner of the office with actual windows, and a team that reported to me. I started going to therapy regularly. I didn't talk about revenge. I talked about boundaries, about how strange it was to grow up thinking love meant sacrifice. How scary it was to walk away when you've been trained your whole life to stay. And most of all, how good it felt not to. My boyfriend, no, my partner now, was still with me. Still calm. Still quiet. Still showing up. We signed a lease on a new place. Bigger, light pouring in from every angle. A space that felt like something we built together, not something I was carrying for someone else. One night, I found an old box in the back of my closet. It was filled with letters, mostly mine, journal entries, and notes to myself I never mailed. One of them was a list of things I wished I could say to my parents. It had been folded and unfolded so many times the edges were soft. It said things like, "I'm not your investment. I'm not your second chance. You don't get to call it love if it only works when I'm useful." I read it once, then burned it because I didn't need it anymore. They had tried to reach back into my life. They'd shown up, called lawyers, tracked down addresses, guilt relatives. They'd sent boxes of memories and twisted apologies. They'd done everything except change. They wanted me to come back, not because they missed me, but because they missed what I gave them. But I wasn't theirs to use anymore. I had finally become someone who didn't need their approval, their permission, or their recognition. And the irony? They're the ones who told me I wouldn't survive without them. Now they're watching me thrive while their lives unravel from the same chaos they used to dump on me. And I haven't said a word. No retaliation, no angry calls, no posting screenshots or dragging them through the mud. I don't need to, because I'm living well, quietly, cleanly, on my own terms. The best revenge wasn't destroying them. It was realizing they never deserved to be part of this life I was building. And the door is not just closed. It's gone. A year later, it's almost like they never existed. I don't mean that in a cruel way. I mean it in the way that a healed wound stops itching. The scar is there, sure, but it doesn't demand attention anymore. I wake up in the morning and my first thought isn't whether they've tried to contact me. I don't check my blocked list like I used to. I don't scan every unknown number or look over my shoulder when I'm out in public. I'm just here, living free. My boyfriend, still my partner, now my best friend in the truest sense, asked me once if I ever thought about going back, reconnecting just to say something final, maybe to get the last word. And I told him the truth. I don't want the last word. I already took it when I walked away. They had chance after chance to do right by me. Not just during the last few years, but my whole life. They chose to weaponize guilt, to play the victim when I didn't play along, to cash in on my loyalty like it was some unlimited credit card. And when I stopped, they didn't apologize. They panicked. Now they live in a one-bedroom apartment in a suburb no one wants to admit they are from. The same people who once bragged about my income, my career, my reliability, those same people are now quietly avoiding the subject, pretending like I cut them off over something small, like it wasn't years of slow betrayal. My sister tried to reach out once through someone else's account. Said she was in therapy. Said she finally saw things clearly. Said she missed me. But not once did she say, "I'm sorry." So I didn't respond. Some doors don't get reopened. Some bridges don't get rebuilt. Not out of spite, but out of peace. Because if I let them back in even a little, I know how it ends. They cry, they ask, they pull, and I bleed. So, I'm done bleeding for people who only ever see me as a resource. Instead, I'm building something that's mine. My career, my relationship, my life, my identity. Separate from them, untouched by their chaos. And if they ever wonder what happened to me, they can look me up. They can see the photos of the places I've traveled, the goals I've hit, the life I've built. They can see the smiles that aren't fake, the peace that isn't performative. They can see the life I was never allowed to live while they held the reins. That's the real ending. Not a dramatic confrontation, not a screaming match in a driveway. Just this: they lost access and I found me. Now on to the next story. Story 6. Before my sister's wedding, I noticed my card was charged for the entire reception. She smirked. "You a loser who don't have a family to support. You should cover it." I just smiled and said, "Then you'll love what comes next." She rolled her eyes. Next day, my phone exploded with 68 calls. My parents were yelling, her new husband was panicking, and she was begging me to fix it. I quietly called the venue and pulled my payment. They owed $15,000 by the end of the day or it was canceled. I noticed the charge late one night when I was half asleep, my phone buzzing on the nightstand. I squinted at the screen, trying to make sense of the numbers. $15,000 gone. My first thought was that my card had been hacked. I scrambled to open my banking app, my heart pounding as I pulled up the transaction details. That's when I saw that the charge was to the Everly, the high-end banquet hall my sister Amanda had been raving about for months. My stomach sank. I shot up in bed, wide awake now, the glow of my phone screen casting long shadows across my small, cluttered apartment. I didn't want to believe it, but deep down I already knew Amanda had used my card. I tried to calm myself to think rationally. Maybe this was just a horrible misunderstanding. But as I continued to scroll through my statements, the truth hit me in the face. I found smaller charges as well. Catering tastings, flower deposits, even a $500 charge to a bridal boutique. All under my name. That's when it hit me. She had my card information from a few months ago when she forgot her purse at a family dinner and I had picked up the tab. I remembered giving my card to the waiter without thinking twice. She must have taken a picture of it or saved the number. I sat there in the dark, my jaw clenched so tight it hurt. This wasn't just a mistake. This was deliberate, premeditated. She planned this, assuming that I would just eat the cost because in her mind, I was the expendable sibling, the one without a wife, without children, without a real family. Just a paycheck with a pulse. The next morning, I stormed into my parents' house. Amanda was in the kitchen flipping through a glossy bridal magazine, her engagement ring catching the morning light like a smug little beacon. My parents sat at the table quietly sipping coffee. I didn't waste time with small talk. I held up my phone, the list of charges filling the screen. "Did you use my card for the wedding?" Amanda looked up, barely glancing at my phone before smirking. "Of course I did. You're 26, single and childless. What else are you going to spend your money on? You should be happy to help out. You have no one else to support." My parents just kept sipping their coffee, not even blinking. It was like a coordinated ambush. They clearly knew and didn't say anything. I felt my pulse pounding in my temples, my fists clenching at my sides. I stared at them, at the family I had spent years trying to win approval from, the same family that now saw me as nothing more than a walking, talking ATM. I forced a tight, cold smile. "Then you'll really like what comes next," I said, turning on my heel and walking out. I walked back to my apartment, my hands shaking. I had never felt so betrayed, so used. But I wasn't going to let them get away with it. I was done being their doormat, their backup plan. That night, I called the banquet hall. I didn't just cancel the payment. I reported it as unauthorized. I made sure to explain the situation clearly, that my card had been used without my permission. They agreed to immediately cancel the transaction and flag the account. Then, just to twist the knife a little deeper, I asked them to put the date back up for booking. The next morning, my phone exploded. 68 missed calls. Amanda, her fiancé, my parents. I let them all go to voicemail, enjoying the panicked, angry messages that piled up. Finally, around noon, Amanda sent a desperate text. "Fix this or you'll ruin my wedding." I just smiled. She had no idea, and that was just the beginning. By that afternoon, the panic had clearly set in. Amanda's fiancé, Mark, was the first to show up at my door. I heard the frantic pounding on the wood as I took a long, slow sip of my coffee, savoring the moment. I let him knock for a good minute before finally opening the door. He looked like he'd just run a marathon, sweat beading on his brow despite the cool spring air. He didn't even bother to greet me. "What the hell, Jeremy?" he snapped, his eyes wild. "Amanda just called me in tears." "What did you do?" I leaned against the doorframe, forcing myself to remain calm. "I took my money back, Mark. You know, the 15 grand your fiancé stole from me." He stammered, clearly not expecting me to hit back so directly. "You can't just... it was a misunderstanding. Family helps family." I let out a short, bitter laugh. "A misunderstanding? So, taking my card information without asking and using it to pay for a wedding I wasn't even asked to attend is just a misunderstanding now." He shifted uncomfortably, his shoulders hunching. "Look, man, you're her brother. This is her big day. Can't you just let it go?" I felt a familiar heat rise in my chest, the old bitter anger I'd learned to swallow over the years. I pushed it back and let my words come out cold and sharp. "No, Mark, I can't. And if you don't pay the balance by the end of the day, the venue is gone. They're already lining up other couples for the date." His face paled, and for a moment I almost felt bad. Almost. But then I remembered Amanda's smug smile, the way my parents had just sat there, complicit in the whole thing, and the pity evaporated. Mark stumbled back a step, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. "You're going to ruin this for her," he finally managed, his voice shaking. I leaned forward and lowered my voice. "No, Mark. She ruined this for herself." I closed the door in his face, feeling a twisted sense of satisfaction as I heard him mutter curses on the other side. But that wasn't the end of it, of course. About an hour later, my parents showed up, banging on my door like it was some kind of intervention. I took a deep breath, braced myself, and swung it open. My mom burst in first, my dad close behind, both of them looking like they'd rehearsed this ambush on the way over. My mom's face was contorted with a mixture of anger and disbelief, while my dad just looked disappointed, as if I'd let them down by not willingly sacrificing myself for Amanda's fairy tale day. "Jeremy, what the hell is this?" my mom hissed, shoving her phone in my face. It was a screenshot of the email from the Everly confirming that the payment had been canceled and the date was now open to other couples. "You're ruining your sister's wedding." I forced myself to breathe slowly, refusing to let her drag me back into that familiar cycle of guilt and obligation. "No," I said, my voice cold. "She ruined it when she stole my money." My father stepped forward, his jaw clenched. "You're overreacting. You don't have a family, Jeremy. You're not married. You don't have kids. What else do you spend your money on?" I felt something inside me snap, a last fraying thread of patience. I met his gaze, my own eyes hard. "I spend it on myself, Dad, because it's my money. And if you think I'm just going to let it go, you've seriously misjudged me." Before they could launch into their next round of attacks, I cut them off. "You have until the end of the day to come up with the 15 grand. If you don't, the wedding's off and that's not my problem." I slammed the door in their faces, my hands shaking as I leaned against it, my heart thundering in my chest. But I knew this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I expected the chaos to peak after that, but I clearly underestimated my family's capacity for entitlement. The next day, I got a text from my cousin Liz, the one relative who actually bothers to stay in touch without asking for anything. She warned me that Amanda had started spinning a wild story about how I was sabotaging her wedding out of jealousy and spite. According to Amanda, I had promised to cover some of the expenses as a gesture of support, and now I was trying to back out at the last minute to ruin her special day. I just shook my head, my anger simmering all over again. I thought about calling her out right then and there, telling the whole family the truth, but I decided to let her dig her own grave a little deeper. A few hours later, my phone buzzed again, but this time, it wasn't Amanda or my parents. It was my Uncle Robert. Now, my aunt and uncle are a different breed. They're the only ones in my family who've ever treated me like an actual adult, not just a walking bank account. They live a few towns over and don't get involved in the usual family drama. But apparently, they had heard about the situation and were driving through my area. About 30 minutes later, I heard a knock at my door, and when I opened it, there they were. My uncle with his no-nonsense stare and my aunt with her arms crossed, clearly ready for a fight. But before they could get inside, I saw another car pull up. It was my parents with Amanda and Mark behind them. The whole circus had come to my front door. My uncle gave me a quick knowing look, then stepped aside as my parents rushed past him into my living room. Amanda was on the verge of tears. Mark followed, looking as excited as a man on his way to the gallows. Amanda immediately launched into her speech, her voice cracking with manufactured emotion. "I can't believe you're doing this to me, Jeremy. I'm your sister. This is my wedding." I held up a hand, cutting her off. "You mean the wedding you tried to make me pay for without asking? The one you used my card for without my permission?" My aunt snorted, clearly struggling to contain her anger. My uncle, never one for subtlety, just shook his head. "Is that true, Amanda?" She flinched, her eyes darting between our uncle and me, clearly not expecting to be cornered. She tried to stammer out a denial, but my uncle cut her off. "If you didn't have the money for a wedding, you shouldn't have planned one you couldn't afford." My parents, who had braced themselves for another round of moralizing, suddenly looked like they'd swallowed a mouthful of sour lemons. My aunt's eyes narrowed as she stepped forward, her tone sharp. "And you too," she said, jabbing a finger at my parents, "should be ashamed of yourselves for going along with this. If you can't afford a wedding, you have no right to make your son pay for it." I watched the color drain from Amanda's face, her carefully constructed facade crumbling in real time. For once, my parents had no snappy comebacks, no lectures about family duty or sacrifice. They just stood there shifting uncomfortably under my uncle's withering gaze. My uncle crossed his arms, his eyes fixed on my parents. "If you try this again, you can count us out. We won't stand by while you treat Jeremy like a second-class family member." The room fell into a tense, awkward silence, broken only by the low hum of my refrigerator. I took a deep breath, feeling a weight I hadn't even realized I was carrying begin to lift. Finally, my uncle turned back to me. "Kick them out, Jeremy. You don't owe them anything." I met his gaze, a sudden surge of confidence flooding my chest. I turned to my parents, Amanda and Mark, my jaw set. "You heard him. Get out. All of you." They hesitated for a moment. Amanda's eyes filled with tears, but I didn't flinch. I just pointed at the door. One by one, they shuffled out, my mother casting one last wounded glance over her shoulder, as if I had somehow betrayed her by standing up for myself. As the door clicked shut behind them, my aunt took a long, slow breath. She reached out and squeezed my shoulder. "You did the right thing, Jeremy. Don't let them make you feel any different." My uncle just nodded, his jaw set, but his eyes a little softer than I'd ever seen them. As they left, I stood in the doorway and watched their car disappear down the street, a strange mixture of relief and exhaustion washing over me. I knew this wasn't the end, though. Amanda wasn't the type to back down quietly, and I had a feeling my parents weren't going to let this go without a fight. But for the first time in years, I felt like I had the upper hand. I should have known Amanda wouldn't go down quietly. The next morning, my phone started buzzing again. But this time, it wasn't just her or my parents. It was mutual friends, extended family, even a few coworkers who had somehow been drawn into the mess. Amanda had apparently changed tactics and was fully into her wronged bride role. She had posted a long, tearful message on social media, painting me as the bitter, spiteful brother who was trying to ruin her wedding out of jealousy. She talked about how I had promised to help pay for it and then backed out at the last minute, leaving her and Mark scrambling to save their big day. The email exploded. Relatives I hadn't heard from in years suddenly crawled out of the woodwork to scold me for being selfish and ungrateful. Old family friends called me out for abandoning my sister in her time of need, and some even suggested that I apologize and make things right. It was all so absurd that I actually laughed. I sat back and scrolled through the flood of outraged comments, my fingers itching to type out the real story, but then I stopped. If Amanda wanted to play this game, I'd let her. I had no intention of defending myself in the court of public opinion, but that didn't mean I was going to just roll over. Instead, I called my uncle. He answered on the second ring, his gruff voice immediately cutting through the chaos. "Jeremy, I saw the post. Don't worry about it. We're on our way." I blinked. "You're coming back?" "Yep. Your aunt was so mad she almost broke her phone when she read it. We'll be there in 20 minutes later. I heard the rumble of their car pulling up outside. But before they could even get to my door, I heard another set of tires screech to a stop on the street. I looked through the window and felt my stomach turn. It was my parents again, with Amanda and Mark right behind them. I opened the door just as my aunt and uncle reached my porch, my heart pounding in my chest. My parents and Amanda stormed up the steps, their faces contorted with a fresh wave of indignation. Amanda didn't even wait for an invitation. She pushed past my uncle and jabbed her finger in my face. "How dare you turn Uncle Robert and Aunt Linda against me? You're tearing this family apart." I barely had time to react before my mother stepped forward, her voice sharp and brittle. "Jeremy, you have to fix this right now. Your sister is humiliated. Do you realize what you've done?" Before I could even form an answer, my uncle stepped between us, his broad shoulders practically filling the doorway. He looked down at Amanda, his face set like granite. "Enough. You've dragged Jeremy through enough of your nonsense." Amanda recoiled, her mouth hanging open. She looked to my parents for support, but my aunt cut them off before they could even begin. "You've had your say. Now it's our turn." She stepped into my living room. My uncle closed in behind and motioned for me to close the door. I did, locking it for good measure. My parents and Amanda stood frozen in the foyer as if they'd just walked into a courtroom and realized they were the ones on trial. My uncle turned to face them, his jaw clenched. "You've been using Jeremy for years, treating him like a backup plan because he doesn't fit into your perfect little family narrative. Well, that stops now." My mom opened her mouth to protest, but my aunt silenced her with a sharp look. "You tried to guilt him into paying for a wedding he didn't want to pay for. You used his card without authorization, and now you're trying to publicly shame him for protecting his own finances. Are you even listening to yourselves?" The room fell into a heavy, suffocating silence. Amanda's face had gone from angry red to ghostly white, her fingers twitching as if she wanted to slap someone but couldn't decide who deserved it more. My dad, usually the loudest voice in any argument, just stood there, jaw clenched, eyes fixed on the floor. For once, he had nothing to say. Finally, my uncle took a step forward, his voice deep and dangerous. "You're lucky Jeremy didn't charge you with theft. If you keep this up, you won't just lose your wedding, you'll lose a lot more." With that, my uncle turned and headed for the door, my aunt right behind him. She stopped just long enough to look over her shoulder at me and gave me a small nod of encouragement before they left. For a long moment, no one said anything. Then, without another word, my parents and Amanda walked out of my apartment, their footsteps heavy and defeated. I leaned back against the door as it clicked shut and let out a long, shaky breath. I knew they weren't done. Amanda had too much pride to let this go, and my parents were too stubborn to admit they'd been wrong. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had real allies in my corner. And whatever came next, I was ready. After that last showdown, I thought maybe, just maybe, Amanda and my parents would finally back off. But I should have known better. 2 days later, I came home from work to find my mailbox stuffed with pink envelopes. Wedding invitations. I tore one open and my jaw dropped. It was from Amanda. Not only had she decided to go through with the wedding, but she had doubled down. The invitation contained a line that read, "A family celebration made possible by the generosity and love of our families." I felt my blood pressure rise. She was still spinning the same lie, that I had agreed to help pay for her wedding and then tried to back out. I threw the invitation on my kitchen counter and tried to calm down. I couldn't believe her nerve. After everything that had happened, she was still trying to spin the story in her favor, painting me as the villain. I took a deep breath and reminded myself that I had already cut off the money. Without my card, they'd have to come up with the full $15,000 themselves. But then a darker thought crept into my mind. What if they had found a way around it? What if they had somehow managed to reopen the payment line with the banquet hall, or worse, convinced my parents to foot the bill themselves and blame me if it fell through? I grabbed my phone and dialed the banquet hall, my heart pounding. The manager picked up after a few rings, and I forced my voice to remain calm. "Hey, this is Jeremy. I just wanted to confirm that my card is still blocked for the upcoming wedding." The manager hesitated for a moment. "Oh yes, Mr. Matthews. We actually had a call from your sister a few days ago trying to clear this up, but we explained that there's nothing we can do without your authorization. She, didn't take it very well." I let out a slow, relieved breath. At least this was one thing I didn't have to worry about. I hung up, feeling a little better, but my phone buzzed again almost immediately. It was my uncle. "Jeremy, we just got our invitation," he said, his voice sharp. "What the hell is this nonsense about family support making the wedding possible?" I laughed, the sound coming out bitter and strained. "It's Amanda. She's still trying to play the victim." He sighed, and I could almost see him rubbing his temples on the other end of the line. "All right, well, we'll deal with that. But listen, I just heard from one of your cousins. Amanda's trying to scrape together the rest of the money. She's been hitting up everyone in the family, spinning some sob story about how you're ruining her big day out of spite." I closed my eyes and pinched the bridge of my nose. Of course she was. She was probably hoping to guilt enough people into bailing her out at the last minute. "Thanks for the warning, Uncle Robert," I said. "I appreciate it." He hesitated for a moment. "Just keep your guard up. She's desperate, and desperate people do stupid things." I hung up, my mind racing. I knew Amanda, and I knew she wouldn't stop until she'd squeezed every last bit of sympathy and money out of the family. I went to my laptop and quickly typed up a message and sent it to every relative I could think of, from my cousins to distant aunts and uncles. I kept it short and direct, laying out exactly what had happened. How Amanda had used my card without permission, how she and my parents had tried to guilt me into paying for her wedding, and how I had finally put my foot down. I hit send and sat back, my heart still racing. I knew it would stir things up, but I was done letting Amanda control the narrative. If she wanted a war, I was ready to meet her head on. And for the first time in weeks, I actually felt like I could come out on top of this whole mess. I should have known that Amanda's last move would be a desperate one. 2 days after I sent that email to the family, I came home to find my apartment door slightly ajar. My stomach churned as I walked in, my heart pounding in my ears. The place was a mess. My couch cushions had been tossed, drawers left open, papers strewn across the floor. It looked like a scene from a bad crime show. My laptop was missing along with some other electronics. And when I checked my bedroom, my safe, the one where I kept my passport, some emergency cash, and a backup card, had been pried open. I felt a wave of cold rage wash over me. I knew who was behind it. Amanda had crossed the line. I dialed 911, my hands shaking as I tried to keep my voice steady. The operator took my information, and within 15 minutes, 2 officers were at my door taking pictures and dusting for fingerprints. As I watched them work, my phone buzzed again. It was a message from my uncle. "Jeremy, I just heard from one of your cousins. Amanda's been running around telling people that you owe her money and that you're mentally unstable. She's trying to turn the whole family against you." I clenched my jaw, my blood boiling. Now, she wasn't just trying to ruin my financial stability. She was trying to destroy my reputation. When the officers finished, one of them turned to me, his expression serious. "Do you have any idea who might have done this?" Anyone with a motive to hurt you. I nodded, forcing the words past the lump in my throat. Yes, my sister. She's desperate. The officer's eyes hardened, and he jotted something down in his notebook. We need her information. If we can link her to this, we'll press charges. After they left, I collapsed on my torn couch, my mind racing. I felt like my whole life had been turned upside down, and the people who were supposed to have my back were the ones holding the knife. But then later that night, I got a call from my uncle. Jeremy, it's done, he said, his tone firm. I had a long talk with your parents. They know what Amanda did, and they're paying for the damages. They don't want the scandal, and they don't want to risk the police getting involved. I let out a long breath, the tension in my shoulders easing a little. Thank you, Uncle Robert. I don't know what I'd do without you. He hesitated, his voice softening. Just take care of yourself, boy. You deserve better than this. As I hung up, I felt a strange mixture of relief and exhaustion. My parents had chosen to sweep Amanda's mess under the rug, but at least this time they were paying for it. In the end, Amanda got her wedding, but it came at a price. She had burned every bridge, destroyed every relationship, and left a trail of resentment in her wake. My parents had to spend tens of thousands of dollars cleaning up her mess, and I had finally drawn a line they couldn't cross. And perhaps for the first time in years, I felt free. Now on to the next story. Story 7. While recovering from surgery, I pretended to sleep as Mom whispered to my brother at the foot of the bed. Just pour it into a glass and that's it. No witnesses. I opened my eyes and they smiled, and I pretended not to hear. 3 days later, karma met them. I've never been one to slow down. Not in business, not in life. If something hurts, I shake it off and keep going. That attitude has worked for me for 34 years. I started my own logistics company when I was 25 and grew it from my basement to 1 warehouse, then 2, then 5. Now, I've got a couple dozen employees and customers who write checks with too many zeros to complain. But no amount of drive can keep an appendix from bursting in the middle of a Tuesday. I remember the pain like something pushing out from inside, like something sharp trying to dig its way out. I waited too long to get it checked out. When they finally got me under the knife, it didn't go well. The surgeon told me later that they nicked something, maybe an artery, and I lost more blood than they were comfortable with. So what should have been a 24-hour stay turned into a 6-day hospital bed sentence. My mom started showing up more than usual. She hates hospitals. She's always said they smell like loss. But now she was coming in every day, bringing things I hadn't asked for and sitting quietly at the edge of the room like she was taking mental inventory. I thought maybe she was just worried, but something about the way she watched me didn't feel like concern. Felt like calculation. My younger brother, Adam, came twice. He's not the type to show up unless someone reminds him. Even then, he usually forgets. He was always the golden one for my mother. I did the business, I made the money, but Adam could do no wrong, even if he did nothing. A few months before the surgery, my mom made a strange comment when I joked about dying early. We were talking about something unrelated, and I said, "Well, if I drop dead tomorrow, you can have the company." She didn't even hesitate. She said, "If you die early, it's all ours anyway, right?" And smiled like it was just a harmless joke. I laughed. I didn't think about it again until I was in the hospital. 3 days after the surgery, I was stuck in that room. Still sore, still weak, pretending to sleep. That's when I heard her come in. I kept my eyes closed. My mother's voice came softly but clearly from the end of the bed. She said, "Just pour it in the glass and that's it." At first, I didn't understand. Then I felt it. That drop in your stomach when your body knows something before your brain catches up. Adam didn't react right away. Then he said, "But he's still your son." And she replied calmly and flatly, "One son more, one son less." I opened my eyes slowly. They both looked at me at the same time. They smiled as if nothing had happened. My mother came over with the same glass and asked me how I felt. I asked for water and she handed it to me. I held it. I didn't drink. They stayed a few minutes, talked about how the garden was at home, how the neighbor's kid got arrested again. They left like any other visit. But now everything was different. I knew what I was hearing, and I knew what they were up to. They didn't get a chance to put whatever it was in me. I'd woken up just in time. They thought I didn't hear, thought I didn't know. I spent the next 3 days in that hospital bed pretending everything was fine, and then I was discharged. I didn't go home. I went somewhere else because, 3 days later, they were going to find out what it feels like when someone is planning something behind your back, and I didn't want to pretend to be asleep anymore. I left the hospital on a Friday afternoon. My body still aching but my mind clearer than it had been in days. I didn't go home right away. I didn't want to give them the satisfaction of seeing me stumble in weak and disoriented. No, I had other plans. I checked into a small hotel on the outskirts of town. Somewhere quiet, somewhere they wouldn't think to look. I could have gone to my own place, but I knew my mother and Adam would probably be waiting for me there. They would try to pull some version of, let's talk about what happened. And I wasn't in the mood for any more of their rehearsed innocence. I spent that night going over everything. The last few months, the little hints I'd ignored, the way my mother had suddenly started visiting more often, talking about her plans for the future even when I was perfectly healthy. And then there was Adam, my lazy, indifferent brother who had always let me do the hard work and carried the load, but suddenly showed up with questions about the company, the passwords, the accounts. I thought back to that moment in the hospital room when I heard them whispering. Still made my skin crawl. One son more, one son less. My mother had said without a moment's hesitation. It was as if I was just another thing to be replaced. But it wasn't just that, it was the glass, the way she told Adam to pour it in, and that's it. What was it? Was it poison? Something that would knock me out for good? I had no idea, but I wasn't going to take any chances. I wasn't going to let them get away with it. That night, I called a few people I knew from business. My lawyer, a couple of old friends who ran a security company. I knew I needed something concrete before I made my move. The next morning, I was still in that hotel room scanning old documents on my laptop. Contracts, financials, anything that might prove what I was beginning to suspect, that my mother and Adam had been plotting behind my back for some time. They weren't just thinking about getting control of my company if I died. They were counting on it. I found a few things that made my heart skip a beat. Signed papers, documents that made it look like they were preparing for something. It wasn't much, but it was enough to confirm my suspicions. I'd made my move. I finally went home that afternoon. When I walked through the door, it was eerily quiet. Too quiet. I wasn't expecting a parade, but the place had a tense atmosphere like everything was about to explode. Adam was sitting in the living room scrolling through his phone, looking bored. He didn't even look up when I walked in. "Hey," I said, setting my bag down. "I'm back." He grunted but didn't say anything. He knew. He knew something had changed. My mom came out of the kitchen a few moments later. She smiled. The same fake, sweet smile that had been plastered on her face the whole time I was in the hospital. "How are you, Jacob? I'm so glad you're home." I didn't answer right away. Instead, I just studied her, and for the first time I saw her for who she really was. This wasn't the woman who raised me. This was a stranger playing a game. "I'm fine," I said, walking past her into the kitchen. "But I don't want to talk about it right now." "Of course," she said, her voice sweet. "But just so you know, Adam and I have been talking about the business. We've been making some plans, just in case something happens." I froze. She wasn't even trying to be subtle anymore. The mask was completely off. I turned to face her. "What plans?" Her smile faltered but quickly recovered. "Just normal stuff, you know? Updating the will, making sure the business stays in the family." My blood ran cold. Now I had all the proof I needed. I didn't let on that I knew what they were up to. Not yet. I didn't want to show all my cards at once, but I made it clear that I wasn't going down without a fight. "I need to rest," I said, turning to leave. "I'll talk to you later." I could feel their eyes on me as I walked away, but I didn't look back. I didn't sleep much that night. I was too busy thinking about what I had to do next. I wasn't just going to get revenge. I wasn't just going to get even. No, I was going to make them wish they never thought of crossing me. And when the time was right, they would learn the hard way what happens when you underestimate your own blood. In 3 days, I would have everything ready, and then the real fun would begin. The day after I got home, I woke up early. Though my body still ached, I couldn't rest. not knowing what I knew, not after hearing my mother calmly suggest that I'd be terminated as if I were a minor inconvenience, not after seeing how easily Adam went along with it. I stayed quiet for now. I made breakfast as if nothing had happened. Toast, eggs, coffee. I knew Mom would come snooping around. She always did when she thought something was getting out of hand. And sure enough, she walked into the kitchen just as I was finishing my plate. She smiled like it was Sunday morning and said she was glad to see me up and around. I nodded, asked about her garden, pretended everything was fine. She offered to make me tea and I said no, I had coffee. I could see her scanning the room, her eyes landing on my cup as if she hoped I'd already had something else. Adam walked in 15 minutes later, still in sweatpants and looking like he hadn't showered in 2 days. He grunted a good morning and opened the refrigerator, asking if there was anything to eat. Mom made a show of making him a plate, acting normal. I knew it was only a matter of time before they tried again. Whatever plan they had, it wasn't finished. So I got moving. The first thing I did was text Mitchell, my attorney. I told him we needed to move quick on the paperwork I'd mentioned earlier. Total legal lockdown of the company, full control of the assets, no access for anyone else without my permission. I told him to push everything through under emergency protocols. He didn't ask any questions. Mitchell is smart that way. Then I called Eric. He'd started going through the office systems for me the night before. I asked him to check the activity on the company's main bank account. I wanted to know if anything strange had happened while I was in the hospital. 2 hours later, he called me back. "Hey man," he said, "you're going to want to sit down for this." Apparently, 2 days after my surgery, while I was still barely conscious, someone had tried to make a wire transfer, $50,000 from the business account, disguised as a vendor payment. Eric blocked it because the vendor name didn't check out, but he traced the login. Guess whose account it came from? Adam's. He didn't even try to hide it. He just logged in from his laptop and tried to move company funds while I was lying in a hospital bed trying not to die. I didn't sit down. I thanked Eric and told him to keep it quiet. Then I called a friend of mine, Kyle, who runs a private investigation firm. We hadn't talked in a while, but I told him I needed to know where my mom and Adam were going, who they were meeting with, and if either of them had talked to a doctor, a lawyer, or anyone in a position to help them legally screw me. He asked me if I was in trouble. I told him not yet, but someone else would be. That afternoon, I got in my car and drove to the office. I didn't tell anybody I was coming. I walked in the front door like a ghost, nodded to the receptionist, and went straight into my office. I sat down, logged in, and changed every password, access key, and admin control point. I stripped Adam's account of all privileges. I called IT and told them to monitor every login, every file access, and to report directly to me. I didn't explain why. I also checked the security camera from the week I was in the hospital. Guess what I saw? 2 nights after my surgery, Mom had shown up at the office with Adam. She used my key card. They went into my office and stayed for 38 minutes. Didn't take anything, just looked around, talked, then they left. I watched the footage over and over. No audio, but I didn't need to hear them to know what they were doing. They were testing the waters, seeing how far they could go before someone pushed back. Well, I was back now. On my way home, I stopped at a small cafe where the barista knew my name. I paid cash. I wanted to be seen. I wanted a receipt. Then I stopped at a hardware store and bought a little recording device. One that could sit on a shelf or slip into a pocket without anyone noticing. That night, after dinner, I left it in the hallway near the den where Mom and Adam liked to sit and whisper when they thought I was asleep. I went to bed early and told them I was tired. But I didn't sleep. I lay in the dark, my eyes open, listening to the hum of the house. The next morning, I got the recorder, and what I heard made my stomach turn. Mom was on the phone with someone. I didn't catch a name, but I heard her say something about, "Jacob is tougher than I thought, and we have to be more careful." Then Adam jumped in and asked if they really had to go through with this. She cut him off and said, "It's too late to back out. We've already started." I stopped the tape. This wasn't some vague fantasy about inheriting something. They were doing it right now. They were in the middle of whatever it was. But they weren't fast enough. Tomorrow was day 3, And I wasn't just going to stop them. I was going to let them fall headfirst into the mess they were making while I watched. By the morning of the third day, the pain in my side had dulled to a distant throbbing, but the pain in my head, fueled by the betrayal and the recording I had listened to 3 times that night, was sharper than ever. They were planning something final. That much was clear now, and I knew how they operated. Slowly, manipulatively, never openly until they thought they couldn't lose. But they'd made 2 mistakes. First, they underestimated how quickly I could recover. Second, they forgot that I had built my business on precision timing and making sure people never saw the strike coming until it was over. I spent the morning tying up loose ends. I signed final documents with Mitchell ownership transfers, locked up. If I disappeared, the company wouldn't go to my next of kin. It would go to a trust with no connection to my family. I also sent a message to Eric. Shut everything down today. Complete lockdown. Just me. He didn't even ask why, just sent back a thumbs up. Then I made another call, this time to a guy named Caleb. Ex-cop. Works privately now. I hired him once to investigate a shady competitor. I told him I needed him at my house that night with a body cam and a wire. I didn't tell him the whole story. I just said, I need you to hear something and back me up when it's time. He said, I got you. At 7 p.m., I told Mom and Adam that I wanted to have dinner with them. I thank you, I said, for being there while I was in the hospital. She smiled, and for the first time, I saw how much she thought she'd won. She even brought out wine. I didn't touch mine. Halfway through dinner, I said I had something to show them. I led them into the den. Caleb was already there, sitting like an old friend. I introduced him as a business consultant. Adam didn't question it. He never paid attention to details. Then I hit play. The recorder clicked on, and the sound of their own voices filled the room. My mother's words, clear as glass. We have to be more careful. Adam's voice. Do we really have to go through with this? And then her again. It's too late to back out. We've already started. The air went still. Mom's face changed. First, her eyes narrowed. Then her lips parted as if she were trying to talk her way out of it. Adam just looked lost, like he'd walked into a room and found it on fire. I didn't say a word. Caleb stood up, opened a small folder, and placed a document in front of them. It was a full report. Financial activity logs, login logs, security camera footage from the office, the fake legal drafts, all of it. Then I spoke. You tried to finish me off in that hospital bed. You planned to rob me while I was still hooked up to IVs. You drew up papers as if I was already dead. And if I hadn't opened my eyes that afternoon, I'd be in a coffin right now. My mother began to speak. I raised my hand. You think you're smart. You think you're always one step ahead. But while you were planning my funeral, I was busy digging your graves, professionally. I looked at Adam. You took money out of the company. That's embezzlement. You tried to forge documents to take over a company you had no right to touch. That's fraud. Both of you. Conspiracy to commit fraud, abuse of power, manipulation of private accounts. I stepped closer. Everything you did is documented, witnessed, secured in multiple places. And if I wanted to, I could have you both arrested tonight. Neither of them spoke. They didn't even move. But I wasn't done. I put 2 envelopes on the table. One had their names on it. The other did not. The one with their names contained a legal document cutting both of them off from any financial connection to me or the company. No inheritance, no claims, nothing. The second one, a letter to the authorities, fully documented and signed, should anything happen to me in the future. They opened the envelope, read the contents, and finally understood what they'd lost. I looked at them once more. You will not be wearing handcuffs tonight. I want you to walk around with this for the rest of your life, knowing that you failed, knowing that I saw through every lie, and knowing that I didn't have to destroy you. I just had to take back what you tried to steal. I turned and left the room, Caleb following behind me. The silence in the house was the sweetest sound I'd ever heard. But it wasn't over. Not yet, because the next morning one last surprise would land in their laps, and it would break them. By the time the sun came up, I had already set everything in motion. The final part of my plan wasn't about confrontation. It was about quiet, permanent removal, like closing a door and then sealing it with concrete. At exactly 9 a.m., a cascade began. It started with the banks. My mother's main account, technically a joint account that she had persuaded me to open years ago for emergencies, disappeared under her fingers. Not just frozen, closed. Every transaction traced, every connection severed. She still had a debit card, but it was now tethered to nothing. The same thing happened to Adam, but his went further. He had a car lease through the company under his name as a consulting perk. I'd let it slide for a while. This morning, he stepped outside to find it gone. Towed away. I'd canceled the lease and arranged for the repo to show up right after breakfast. The guy didn't even get to start the engine. By 10 a.m., all business emails tied to either of them were deleted. Autoforwards removed, cloud drives blocked, their names deleted from internal directories. They no longer existed within the walls of the company I built. But here's where things got weird. At 11:37, I got a call from one of our warehouse managers. "Hey, Jacob, something weird just happened." Apparently, my mom had shown up at one of the satellite warehouses, not even the main office. She said she was doing an inspection and tried to go in as if nothing had happened. They turned her away, of course. She caused a scene, claimed she was still part of the management team, and threatened legal action. Security escorted her out, but not before she screamed something crazy. She said I was under some kind of mental manipulation and had been brainwashed by Russian software. Not even kidding. I don't know if she thought that would hold up in court or if she just lost it, but I wasn't expecting this turn of events. Then around 2 p.m., Adam tried to log onto his personal laptop, which he had been using for business access. What he didn't know was that IT had remotely wiped everything that had touched our company server. He panicked and messaged Eric, asking why his files were gone. Eric simply replied, "Ask your brother." I could have stopped there, but I added one more hit. At 5 p.m., I posted a formal public statement on the company's internal portal. Clean, professional. It read, "Effective immediately, Jacob Monroe Enterprises has severed all professional and personal ties with Adam Monroe and Judith Monroe. Neither is authorized to represent or act on behalf of the company in any capacity. Any questions regarding this matter should be directed to legal counsel." Within minutes, the phones exploded. Mom tried to call again, then Adam, then both. I let the calls ring, no voicemail this time. They didn't deserve to leave one. Then came the begging. At 7:42, Adam showed up at my gate. He buzzed in, said he just wanted to talk, said he didn't know what he was doing, said it was Mom's idea, that he wasn't thinking straight. "I just need something," he said. "Anything. A job. A loan. Just help me get back on my feet." I watched him on the security camera. This guy tried to drain my accounts while I was unconscious. He thought I wouldn't wake up, and now he wanted to come back. I muted the intercom and left. At 8:15, my mom sent an email from an old AOL address. It was long, dramatic. It called me ungrateful, then said she'd always loved me and couldn't believe I was doing this to my own family. At the end, she added, "You will regret this one day." No, I won't. She took the shot, she missed, and now I'd erased any possibility of her coming crawling back. But there's one last detail, the twist they'll never see coming. A week after I cut them off, I donated $100,000 in their names to a nonprofit organization that helps victims of financial abuse and family exploitation start over. I made sure the donation made headlines. Their names, my money, a public reminder. They tried to steal my legacy. Now their names are attached to the very people they tried to destroy. That's justice, and it tastes better than vengeance. We have reached the end. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to like and subscribe to the channel for more videos like this, and give us your thoughts about the stories in the comments section. Thank you and see you in the next video.